Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. Growing up, I had a tough childhood. Well, tougher than most, I would think. It was just me and my dad, whom I loved dearly. I never knew what had actually happened to my mother, as my dad simply refused to talk about her. But when he did choose to broach the subject, he didn't hesitate to use every profanity under the sun to describe her, telling me I was well rid of that whore in my life. Naturally, I wanted to know all about my mother, but I was desperately afraid to ask my dad about her. He would become belligerent and start throwing things around the house like a cantankerous teenager, as if the very name of my mother ruffled his feathers up so much. I knew better than to provoke his pugnacious, bellicose moods by asking him awkward questions that he was not prepared to answer. All I had gleaned from him is that my mother had marched out of the house one day, when I was 3 years old, leaving him a note saying she was never ever coming back. Needless to say, she left me in my father's charge. It was this regrettable revelation that had made me come to the firm presumption that whoever my mother was, I didn't like her anyway. I mean, what kind of a mother leaves their 3-year-old daughter under the charge and supervision of their father, and never so much as acknowledges her existence ever again, never even sending her a birthday card? So my birthdays would come and go, and no matter how joyous an occasion they would invariably be, they were always sprinkled with a pepper of sadness and regret. I would secretly ponder if my mother was thinking of me at all, or had she clean forgotten about me. I wanted her to be thinking about me, I really did. But another part of me despised her for her apathetic indifference and insouciant dispassion she held towards me. My father was one of those people that was stone-cold sober during the day, but sometimes at night when he returned home, he would have one too many beers. Let's just say he might become intoxicated once in a while, and when he got drunk or inebriated, he would hurl angry accusations at my mother, whom he hadn't seen for many years. I would often wonder why my father hated her so much, that all these years later, whenever he got drunk, he would scream out her name in a frenzied fury, almost as if she had grievously upset him mere minutes ago. I guess that some rivers run deep, and the wounds my father carried after that relationship were festering and putrefying like soiled garbage that becomes rank. It was as if the passing of time had only served to exacerbate the hatred he had for my mother. Was time not supposed to be a healer? It certainly wasn't in my father's case. I would ponder if my father was angry with my mother for dumping me on him. Perhaps he felt strangled and choked by my presence in his life, for he had never been free to marry again. Was he furious with my mother for not taking on her share of the responsibilities in taking charge over me? I suspected that this might be the case, and the thought saddened my heart, as despite everything, I loved my father very much indeed. In my early years, me and my father moved around from one place to another, which I found increasingly frustrating, as no sooner had I begun to make friends in one place and settled down, off we went again, so that we never laid down roots. Imagine a gardener constantly changing the location of a tree he's planting every 3 months. That tree is going to take one hell of a beating. How can it allow its roots to spread out in the ground comfortably and finally settle? It was like that for us. In those days my father could have potentially been described as having ants in his pants, as we could never stay in one place for very long. It was like we were travelling gypsies, although I'm afraid my father's trap was not desperately exciting or nostalgic like one of those old-fashioned gypsy wagons with their horses. It would invariably be the same old roller coaster again and again and again. I would be the awkward new girl in school. The neighbours' curtains would twitch as they gossiped garrulously about the new folk in town. Wherever we went, we felt saliently conspicuous, like pronounced strangers. But then that's exactly what we were, which was never ever a good feeling. I remember finding it enigmatic and inexplicably baffling that my father would sometimes come home and just say, "We're packing up tomorrow and leaving," just like that, without any advance warning. I knew he was serious. His square jaw would tighten. He would run his large hand through his grey hair, in such a way that I knew he resolutely meant business. Naturally, I always asked my father why we were moving away again, especially since I'd begun to feel settled and established in a brand new place. He would tell me he'd got tired of it. His feet had grown itchy. "I've had enough of this dump, sweetheart. We're moving away," he would say. "But Dad, it's not a dump," I would protest. "I really, really love it here." I knew that there was no point in arguing with my willful, obstinate father, who was as stubborn as a mule. Persuading him to change his mind would be as easy as persuading a goldfish to swim on dry land. It was never ever going to happen, so I resigned myself to this reality. I recall thinking we would be better off living in a Winnebago if we were moving around this frequently. I even expressed these feelings to my father, but a Winnebago for him held absolutely no appeal. All this travelling around from one town to another naturally created unnecessary, unwarranted disorder, pandemonium, disruption, upheaval and chaos in my young life, rarely affecting the quality and the standard of my schoolwork. I'd been to over 14 schools in a short space of time, which was ridiculous. My father was a carpenter. His jobs were always cash in hand. As far as I knew, he didn't even have a bank account or a credit card. To all intents and purposes, he would keep a large bag with thousands of dollars in it under our mattress, which I found incredibly useful should I need a spot of cash, for he never counted his money. Suffice to say, my father had very little trouble finding work, so we could pretty much move spontaneously and impulsively anywhere we fancied. The next day he would find gainful employment. On one occasion I attended a phenomenal school, where the teacher there, Miss Caroline Campbell, was just so interested in every one of her pupils. I had never encountered a teacher as intuitive and as inspirational as her. She was one of a kind, like a rose between the thorns. I remember being amazed that she was so focused on me, as all my previous teachers had not really given me a second glance, but this teacher made it her business to learn all she could about me. She appeared somewhat troubled, vexed and perturbed about my flagging grades, and of course the fact that I was seriously lagging behind in all my schoolwork. That was a huge botheration for her that warranted investigation. When I told her I'd been to over 14 schools, she looked at me with gog eyes like a goldfish. "Are you joking, Lydia? You've been to 14 schools?" I remember she crinkled her forehead in perplexment, furrowing her brow curiously. "But why so many schools? That's ridiculous. I don't understand. That's crazy." "Your father's not running away from the law, is he?" she joked. "He hasn't robbed a bank, has he?" "No," I said, "none of the above. My dad just gets bored of staying in one place all the time." "That's nonsensical," she said to me. "It's exceedingly ungracious and inconsiderate of your father, hypothetically speaking, to keep throwing the sails of your lifeboat down a different course all the time. It can be grievously unsettling for a girl your age. How do you feel about all this moving around, Lydia? Does it unsettle you?" "I don't like it," I said, my eyes suddenly filling with tears. Even I was surprised by my emotional outburst to Mrs. Campbell's question, but it seemed to have hit a soft spot, as the tears just rolled down my face like raindrops. Miss Campbell immediately reached for her purse, pulling out several tissues. "Now wipe your tears, dear, and have a jolly good blow of your nose. It's very good to cry, dear. It's an emotional release. How about your mother, dear? How does she feel about you moving around to so many places like this? Surely she's not on board with this absurd arrangement." "My mother never wanted me," I told her. "She abandoned me when I was 3 years old." "Never wanted you," said Miss Campbell, taking me into her arms and ruffling her hands through my hair. "I very much doubt that, my dear. I think you've got your wires crossed somewhere down the line. You're a silly little mink," she continued. "I'm sure your mother wanted you very much. But grown-ups are very complicated. Things happen along the road. So never assume what you think you know is the truth, because the truth can become very twisted and distorted at times. I'll tell you this unequivocally. I'm sure your mother thinks of you very often. She possibly had her good reasons for leaving. Maybe she thought your dad was in a better position to take care of you than she could financially. Maybe she thought he could give you a better start in life. Or maybe she had an emotional breakdown. You don't know." Miss Campbell took my head in her hands and looked into my eyes compassionately. "Now you listen to me, Lydia. Don't you ever say your mother never wanted you. You hear me? I'm sure wherever she is, she wanted you, and she loves you very much. And I don't doubt this, that she's thinking about you all the time." "You really think so?" "Of course I do." "You think it's true?" I said, wiping away more tears. "But then why hasn't she ever been in touch?" "Well, I imagine it can't be easy," said Miss Campbell, "when you're moving around so frequently. She probably doesn't even have your address. It can't be easy to trace you if you move around this much." I'd never thought of that. My tears dried up fast. I realised Miss Campbell was right. How would my mother know how to contact me when our address was always changing? It made me feel a whole lot better. Maybe my mother had been looking for me. But how would she ever be able to find me when we were always wandering off to another place? I remember Miss Campbell made a point of visiting my father in the rented house where we were living. It was a relatively bog-standard semi-detached home, nothing special to write home about, situated in a pretty tree-lined neighbourhood, with tall imposing honey locust trees fringing either side of the asphalt road. We also had a verdant, perfectly mown front and back yard, with a scattering of trees, along with beds of perennial flowers in season. I'm glad to say that this time the interior rooms in the home had been painted in pretty colours, so it didn't look quite so beige and wishy-washy and mundane as all the former residents had, which had been painted in standard white colours, and furnished by someone who lacked any imagination. The house we were currently renting had a private fenced-in backyard and a large mature oak tree with a substantial extended branch, where my father had attached my favourite swing. I loved swinging on that tree branch, especially at night, when I could hear the croaks of the frogs and crickets, and gaze up at the velvety black sky, along with the clusters of twinkling stars. I think it was about 7 p.m. in the evening when I opened our front door. I was shocked to see Miss Campbell standing in the doorway. Her timing couldn't have been more perfect, as my father and I had been watching our favourite comedy on television, and finished the pizza slices we had ordered. "Don't mind me, Lydia," she had said. "I need a private word with your father, if I may." Miss Campbell was an attractive woman, with straight blonde hair, who always wore tight black leather skirts above her knees, with tights that had a long black line down the middle, and high patent black shoes, along with glamorous silk shirts. I think my father was rather delighted to open the door to such a glamorous lady, but after her visit to us he seemed to be running rather scared. I remember sitting on the staircase listening in to their conversation. It was a conversation that certainly got me thinking a whole lot, but my thoughts were rather like hot air balloons flying away in the sky, as they weren't based on solid foundations or intrinsic truths, for I didn't know exactly what to think. "Hello, Mr. Joshua. I'm delighted to meet you. I'm Lydia's teacher. My name's Miss Campbell. I'm from the local school. I'm sorry to call on you so late in the evening like this, but I'd appreciate a word with you if I may, concerning your daughter Lydia. It's very important." "Ah, yes," my father had said. "I'm not normally privileged to meet my daughter's teachers. Please do come in, Miss Campbell. Would you like a glass of white wine?" Well, I really mustn't. But maybe one glass, but not more than one glass, as I'm driving.
Lydia never told me that she had such a glamorous teacher, my father had chided.
Well, you may wonder why I'm visiting you, Mr. Joshua.
I was, rather. It obviously concerns my daughter. I hope she's behaving herself.
Of course she's behaving herself. Your daughter Lydia is a delightful young girl, Mr. Joshua. But it's come to my attention that Lydia has been to over 14 schools. That's an awful lot of schools for a young girl her age.
What are you implying, Miss Campbell?
My father's voice had boomed. He sounded rather defensive. I'm not implying anything, Mr. Joshua. On the contrary, I'm just saying that frequenting so many schools for a 13-year-old girl like your daughter, well, it's not good. It's very unsettling for her. You can see that she can't lay down any solid foundations, being yanked from one school to the next. No sooner has she made brand new friends, off she goes again to another school. It's not easy for your daughter. I know children are remarkably resilient, but 3 new schools in 1 year, Mr. Joshua, that is preposterous. It's not normal. It's exceedingly unfair on your daughter. She was telling me she finds all this moving around very distressing and soul-destroying. And frankly, who can blame her? By all accounts, your daughter is a terribly bright girl. She should be achieving high grades, not the low grades that she's actually achieving now. She should be at the top of her class. It's not her grades that are my chief concern. I'm worried about your daughter's emotional stability with all this chopping and changing in her life. I know she's upset that she hasn't heard from her mother. She emphatically believes her mother never loved her. That's a terrible thing for her to have to think, and I'm sure you agree with that. And I'm also sure it's not true at all. I'm sure her mother loves her very much.
Well, it can't be helped if we need to move away. If we need to leave, we need to leave. It's as simple as that. I would appreciate it, Miss Campbell, if you would keep your fat nose out of my daughter's relationship with her mother. It's none of your business. Anyway, her mother wants nothing to do with her.
I'm sure that's not true, Mr. Joshua. But in regards to the most significant matter we are discussing tonight, your daughter tells me you get bored staying in one place for an extended period of time. But I hasten to say, Mr. Joshua, when you raise a daughter, it's not all about you. It's about being altruistic, self-sacrificing, raising her unselfishly, giving her a phenomenal childhood where she can lay down solid foundations and a plethora of happy lifetime memories for the school years, Mr. Joshua. They're so precious. Your daughter is missing out so much on lifelong friendships, and stability is so important for a child like her. All this moving around, it's so disjointing.
Miss Campbell, I'll have you know, my daughter has plenty of stability. She's raised in a loving family, by a father who loves the bones of her. The fact that her mother sauntered off is not something I can help.
I'm sorry to hear that, Mr. Joshua. It can't be easy for you. Turbulent relationships never are. But I think it would be wonderful for Lydia to reconnect with her mother. Is there any way you can make this happen for her?
I don't know what you think you are, Miss Campbell, involving yourself in the personal affairs of my private life. As I keep telling you, it's none of your business. How I choose to raise my daughter is my business. You're her teacher, Miss Campbell, not her therapist. As for my daughter's relationship with her mother, I keep telling you, it's none of your business.
Now, there's no need to get so overheated, Mr. Joshua. For your information, we're both on exactly the same page, singing exactly the same tune. 2 of us have one thing in common. We both want the best for Lydia. I only came to offer you a few pointers, that's all. I thought it would be great for you to comprehend what your daughter is going through, Mr. Joshua. She desperately needs stability. It would be so wonderful if you could settle down in one location permanently. That would give her stability, security and love. Those are the ingredients your daughter needs to thrive, Mr. Joshua.
Thank you, Miss Campbell. You've said your piece. Now I would thank you to go.
But you will give what I've discussed some contemplation, Mr. Joshua.
As I was saying, Miss Campbell, You've said your piece. Now I would like you very much to go."
After Miss Campbell had gone, my father had been pacing up and down our home like a caged tiger in a zoo enclosure. He even picked up a vase from the large wooden coffee table, flinging it violently against the wall.
"Bloody bitch," I heard him saying. "Bloody bitch, putting her nose in my business. Who does she think she is? People like her want locking up. Who does she think she is, sauntering into my home like this, thinking she knows what she's talking about? How presumptuous of her! How completely arrogant!"
I knew my father was really pent up, so I quickly retired to bed, feeling very certain my dad was going to drown his sorrows in a 6-pack of beers while he watched the sports channel. If he got drunk, it would not be my mother he would be bitching about this time, but the well-meaning Miss Campbell. As I retired to bed that night, it did cause me to reflect on how we were always moving around the place. Maybe my father was running away from something, but what? I couldn't imagine. A day or so passed, and then my father was up to his age-old tricks again. I literally wanted to scream. I knew what this was all about. We were moving again. I could feel it in my guts. My father's square jaw was clenched. He was running his large hands through his hair.
"We're moving, Lydia."
"Please, no, Dad. I really love this place. The school here is amazing. I've met so many lovely people here. I really like Anchor Marsdale. She's my best friend. And as for Miss Campbell, well, she's the best teacher I've ever had."
"Well, that's a matter of opinion," my father had said. "Your teacher, Miss Campbell, is a very disagreeable woman. Who does she think she is, interfering in our lives like this?"
"So we're leaving because of Miss Campbell?" I asked him.
"No, we're not moving because of your teacher. We're moving because I'm tired of this place."
"Oh, no," I groaned. "Please, Dad. I really like it here."
"I have decided, Lydia dear, that maybe your teacher, Miss Campbell, had a point about us moving around so frequently. So I found a very beguiling place for us to live. A place I think you're going to like very much indeed. In fact, I think you're going to love it. I've been looking at all the pictures of the place. Would you like to see them?"
"No," I said. "Dad, I wouldn't like to see them. I told you, I don't want to leave. I like this town. I like the people here." I knew my words had fallen on deaf ears. It would only be a matter of time before we arrived at our new destination. So there we were, out on the open road again, travelling to pastures new. My heart felt downcast, disappointed, and despondent. I was in no doubt that this place would be uninspiring. Once again my father had tired of it. We would move away again. I was sure of it, although he had assured me that we were going to lay down roots in this new place. But I was filled with cynicism, doubt, and scepticism, as my father had never been settled a single day in his life. Still, time would tell whether he would remain true to his word. We were driving past high embankments scattered liberally with trees, down quaint country roads, long forgotten by road repairs, for the tarmac that once was a road had forgotten its purpose, as most of it had been taken over by a sea of turf and rambunctious weeds, not afraid to completely monopolise the road with its unruly growth. Unfortunately, the road was not terribly kind to us, as pebbles pelted and pinged against the underbonnet of our truck. Suddenly, in my belly, I felt a strange fluttering and stirring of excitement, for we were journeying down rugged, remote countryside. So I soon discerned that we were going somewhere different this time, and indeed we were. We arrived at a farm gate in an area of North Carolina way off the beaten track, literally in the middle of nowhere. The name on the large cattle gate was Skyfield Heights. We drove past a symmetrical white farmhouse that was as pretty as a picture, with a few barns, stable blocks, meadows where black and bay and grey horses happily frolicked in a field. Finally we took a neat turning in the road, driving down a gravel path towards a tiny little cottage with a sign that said Ivy Cottage. I gasped in amazement. We were really going to be living here. "Are you sure we're going to live here?" I asked my father, dancing up and down with an ebullient joy.
"We are," said my father, taking me into his arms in an affectionate hug. But where is the nearest school? It must be miles away. You're not going to school, my father announced. I'm going to homeschool you here at the cottage myself. The farmhouse you saw belongs to a farmer who's hired me to live on the land and help him on the farm. This is his cottage which we are going to live in. He says you're very welcome to ride his horses. So yes, we have settled here permanently. Really? That's amazing, I said. I had underestimated that word amazing quite considerably, for living in this remote country area, surrounded by viridescent green trees, pretty flowering meadows, rocky outcrops, quaint gravel roads, was really a life-changing experience for me and my father. He had befriended the congenial farmer, so I was permitted to ride one of their black and bay horses regularly in the countryside. I felt much more settled in my life, and homeschooling was working very well for me. My father would regularly take weekly trips to the local town to stock up on supplies, and for once the steady pace of life rolled smoothly. I began to feel settled in every area of my life. Several long months went by, and I couldn't remember a time when I was happier. Me and my father were getting on famously, better than we ever had in the past. My father seemed so much more relaxed and carefree, almost as if the weight of the world had been lifted off his shoulders. These days he barely ever got drunk, as the rich sweetness of the country air, along with the general maintenance work he did for the farmer, enabled him to sleep like he'd never slept before. Our health flourished as the stresses of modern life simply withered away, so the two of us were like wild flowers in the valley that blossomed more and more every day, for it seemed that country life nurtured and enveloped us with the wondrous warmth that the natural world embodied. One night, as I was lying fast asleep in my vintage bedroom, I was absolutely certain I'd heard something walking around our cottage. I woke with a start, feeling certain I wasn't mistaken. I'd never known Farmer Paddy to go walking around our cottage at the dead of night. But if it wasn't him, who was it? Farmer Paddy was a slender, willowy man, with a very light walk. But the person walking outside the cottage was definitely much more sizable, as the bipedal footsteps seemed to be rather heavy on the ground. I listened to the thumping sounds. Thump, thump, thump. I've always been incredibly curious and inquisitive by nature. I couldn't sit back in my bed without finding out what was going on around our cottage so late at night. I glanced briefly at the clock. It was 1:30 in the morning, very late. I pushed back the blue and white fleur-de-lis curtains. That was when I saw a dark, shadowy figure darting right past me, gliding swiftly into the woods. I was so astonished that all I could think was, what the hell was that? Imagine someone waving a huge black umbrella past you so fast that you wonder what it is that you saw flashing past your eyes. But you know you saw something. You weren't mistaken. I wasted no time in throwing on a pair of sneakers, along with a thick sweater, and of course my headlamp. I dashed out of the cottage at record speed. Not for a moment did I think of my own personal safety. I was far too impulsive for that. It was not too dark a night, I'm so glad to say. There was a full ivory moon in the sky, casting its silvery shadows over the countryside, dappling everything in an ethereal luminescence, while the twinkling stars bespeckled the sky in tiny clusters of quaint little glittering jewels tucked away in a black velvety ensemble. There was a slight chill in the air as I ran into the woods, while a faint breeze nuzzled my cheeks and blew some of my blonde locks into my eyes, which I pulled away from my face, fixing them firmly behind my ears. The tall, towering red maples, oaks, and tulipola trees, with full heads of leafy green boughs, began to jiggle in the wind, while a faint stirring of excitement that I'd first felt when me and my dad had moved here began resurfacing in my guts all over again, almost as if hundreds of monarch butterflies were flapping away in my stomach. There was something about the ambience of the night that was evocative, stirring, mysterious, outer-worldly, and enigmatic. I'd never known the woods to feel like this before, as even the sounds of the crickets and frogs were strangely absent, so all I could hear was the whistling sound of the wind blowing through the trees, along with the distant howls of a coyote. It was when I entered the wood grove I could hear the strange chanting sound. It was very peculiar,
very odd. I slowly moved towards that sound until it became much louder. I don't know how to explain the chanting sound to you, only it was low-pitched and very deep, almost like some of those sounds you sometimes hear in meditational mantras. The sounds were very spiritual, deep, very moving. It truly stirred something inside me from a soul level, giving me the strange revelation that there was more to the substance of me than my physical casing. When I got close to the sound, I hid behind a tree trunk, switching off my light, but thankfully no one was paying attention to me. But I could see 8 creatures with hands linked together in a circle, heads bowed as though deep in prayer, repeating the same words again and again. I remember thinking, who are these beings? As the soft silvery flecks of moonlight cast shadows from the open canopy of the trees onto the creatures' bodies. I could see their outer humanoid silhouettes, but their features were a little fuzzy and blurred. All of a sudden, a large male got to stand up in the middle of the circle. He spoke in a few words in a language I could not comprehend or decipher, but it sounded like an old indigenous ancient language, like the First Nations language. The imposing, impressive creature that stood up was enormous, but also wizened, sagacious and old, as if he'd been around for a considerably long period of time. His hair was heavily sprinkled with grey streaks that I secretly suspected was on account of his advancing years. I was stunned by how tall, wide and sinewy this creature was. I think he was possibly 8 foot tall, easily 700 pounds or more, from a conservative estimate. All my attention was focused on the creature's human-like face. I don't know how to explain this to you, but this creature looked so wise, like an oracle you might seek out for spiritual guidance and direction, as if he had an infinite, all-knowing, unfathomable knowledge about anything and everything. I was transfixed and bedazzled by him, realizing immediately that he was a Bigfoot. I beheld a distinctive vaporous blue misty aura whirling around him. It made him look angelic. Everyone seated in that round circle seemed equally as enamoured by what he had to say, as if they were hanging on to his every word, as if every word was a precious jewel that was prized, honoured, esteemed, treasured and revered. Even I was mesmerised and in wondrous awe by his words. I didn't have a clue what he was saying, but his words rolled off his tongue like the ocean waves, smooth, crystal clear, authoritative. They grabbed your attention in a poignant way. It would be like if you were shopping in the supermarket. I imagine you always ignore the dull drawl as the background specials are being announced. But imagine you suddenly hear this voice. You hear this powerful, smooth, clear voice. It goes right through you like an invigorating wind. It stirs up your insides in such a poignant way. You stop and ponder. Who was that? Something in you knew that this was no ordinary voice. It was like that. You could be forgiven for believing that this was the voice of God, or one of his helper angels. I watched the ceremony for a good 20 minutes until it ended. Everyone bowed their heads, and then they got up and glided away, except for the old male, whose eyes were firmly fixed on the tree where I was hiding. And then he said, "May the Lord go with you, precious child, and take you under his wings." And then he nodded at me, and was gone faster than the lightning. It was only after this extraordinary event that I did my research, and learnt more and more about Bigfoot. But this Bigfoot's face was so human, just like yours or mine, with the exception of a very flat nose and a heavily furrowed brow. None of the creatures looked ape-like, although their heads were pyramid-shaped and their arms overlong. I do not know if this was a coincidence, for I do not believe in coincidences personally, but only a day after my strange encounter with this incredulous beast, I was to meet my mother. Now I ask you, what were the chances of that happening? I remember it was late afternoon, veering towards 4 o'clock, and a truck drove down our driveway, parking outside of our cottage. I was chopping vegetables in the kitchen at the time. I saw the woman from the kitchen window, with her long black hair swept to one side of her long neck, which looked exotic like one of those Egyptian queens you see in pictures of ancient Egypt. I could imagine her wearing a royal diadem on her head. I noticed her golden-coloured face was very boyish. Her cheeks were full, her forehead sloped broadly, her nose ever so slightly hooked, and her eyes were dark. She was tall and slender, wearing a white dress with a slit up the front. I remember I almost cut my finger, wondering who this exotic woman could be. She slammed the door of her white SUV and walked very purposefully towards our front door. "Who is that?" said my father, who had been frying onions in a pan on the hob. He glanced out of the window. The colour drained from his face. "Lydia," he said to me in a stern voice, "go to your bedroom right now. I will get this." "But I haven't finished chopping the carrots yet," I protested. "Go to your room now, Lydia," my father ordered me. I went off to my bedroom, but I crept down the stairs and hid behind the curtain in the hallway to hear the conversation in the living room. "It's been a long time, Veronica," said my father once he'd opened the door to her. "I'm amazed you managed to find me." "Well, I did, and I have. You have no idea how tough these last few years have been for me, Neville. You think it's all right just to abscond with our daughter, to disappear into the sunset like that? How did you think that made me feel? You broke my heart." "You should have thought about that, Veronica, when you started threatening divorce. Do you think I was going to sit back and let you take Lydia from me? And have some unreasonable judge laying down the law of how many days a week I can see my daughter? No one was going to take my daughter away from me. No one." "You're so unreasonable, Neville. Don't you think we could have worked out a plan? Sat down like two civilised adults, discussed things in a civil way?" "No, I don't, Veronica, because you have never been civil a day in your life." "Well, more to the point, how is Lydia? I've missed her so much." "Lydia's doing just fine, thank you very much. No thanks to you, I might add." "No thanks to me? What the hell is that supposed to mean?" "It means if you hadn't been so insistent about getting a divorce, nothing like this would have happened in the first place." "Oh, there you go again, turning this all around on me, Neville, when you were the one that abducted our child, not the other way round." "Oh, please, Veronica, stop being so dramatic. How can I abduct my own child?" "Because you took her away from me, Neville. Don't you get it? You have no idea how many times I've got this close to finding you, and then you were gone. You were always one step ahead of me. It was so infuriating." "So what are you going to do now that you've found me? File charges against me?" "Nothing of the kind. What would be the point? You've already stolen most of my daughter's childhood. She's almost 14 now. I've missed out on so much. I'm living with a man and I have a 7-year-old boy and a 5-year-old, and I think it would be so nice for Lydia to meet her stepbrothers. Thanks to you, I never got married because you never even bothered to sign those divorce papers. Over the years, I've hired dozens of private detectives trying to find Lydia." "How did you find me then?" asked my father. "I don't understand. We're in the middle of nowhere. I've left no paper trail behind me." "Even I can't answer that question. That's a conundrum for me as well. The odd thing is I found an envelope in my postbox with all your details, which is why I'm here." "But how is that possible? No one knows who I am or where we're staying." "Never mind, you've found me now." "I'm not going to kick up a fuss, Neville. That would upset Lydia too much. The two of you, I imagine, have a great bond. But I want to get to know my daughter. I feel I have the right." It was at this point I came into the living room. My mother's eyes were fixed on me. Tears began to pour down her face. "Lydia, is that you?" she cried, dashing into my arms, holding me ever so tightly, while she began to rock me like a baby. "You have no idea, sweetheart, how I've longed for this day so very much. I got to a point in my life. I thought this day would never ever happen, that I'd never ever see you again.
I can't believe that it's you, Lydia. So you never wrote a note at 3 years old and abandoned me? Of course not, dear. You were my world. I've been looking for you for years. Now I've found you. I never want to let you go. To cut a long story short, being reunited with my mother was most certainly the best thing that had ever happened to me, and knowing that she had never abandoned me in the first place was so reassuring. I knew she had never stopped loving me, for she had never stopped searching for me. I did forgive my dad for running away with me. He was just frightened of losing me. But I'm glad to say me and my mother made up for lost time. I was to discover that I had 2 step-brothers, whom I love very much. Me and my father stayed at the farmhouse, but I regularly visited my mother and her new family over the weekends. I often wonder how it was that my mother got our address so randomly in the post, literally a day after my Bigfoot encounter. It was like everything in my life lifted after I encountered that anomalous Bigfoot. I often wonder whether the Bigfoots were praying that day. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I was anchored to the kitchen sink on this gloomy, oppressive afternoon in my stone and wood ranch-style home in the Pacific Northwest, where the lugubriously gloomy sky was grey and overcast. Why did the weather have to be so miserable, I wondered? It was autumn, for goodness sake, and the temperature shouldn't have dropped so much as they had done so of late. It was not winter yet, but it seemed like autumn had decided to play truant for a few days, rather like a belligerent teenage student that wanted to hasten winter speedily along. I was wearing a sheer pink cashmere sweater to keep out the chill, and the weather reports had insisted it was likely to rain, with yet more torrential rain forecast for the next couple of days, which was a bummer, for we had been unfortunately experiencing a downpour for an entire week. The ground outside our home had become squidgy and saturated with water, so it was spongy to the touch. My husband had been trailing mud into the house. He seemed to conveniently forget to leave his boots parked in the hallway. I had grown used to the weather being capriciously unreliable like this. I could only hope that they had got their predictions horribly wrong, as I didn't fancy spending my entire life scrubbing the mud out of our cream carpet. The countryside was like an exquisite oil painting of bedazzling russets and golds, with deciduous trees bedecked in all their rich autumn finery, so that every single morning, when I stared out at the bewitching, prepossessing views onto our street, I marvelled at the beauty. But all of that was so sadly lost on this bleak, sorrowful afternoon. I hasten to say my best views from our bungalow-style home were observed from our wraparound porch at the back of our property, which overlooked our substantial-sized backyard, fenced in by a split-rail wooden pole fence that divided our property from a sprawling woodland oasis that belonged to a wealthy farmer who owned acres and acres of land. And in the furthest distance you could observe the smouldering smudge of the mountains, sprinkled so prettily with a light dusting of snow, sometimes even during the summer. Ostensibly, whether sun, shine, wind or rain, the prepossessing views over the mountains were almost always picture-perfect, rather like a beguiling postcard you might see of the Swiss Alps. I considered myself considerably lucky to be living in this idyllic part of the world. It was approximately 4 o'clock in the afternoon, or thereabouts. I was washing up the dishes from a late lunch of cheese, ham, bread and pickles that me and my husband had only recently just enjoyed. I had been trying to get the spare bedroom ready for the arrival of my 7-year-old grandson, Oliver, who was going to stay with us for an entire week, and like any excited grandmother, I was looking exceedingly forward to spending some special quality time with the wee lad, something I had not been afforded for a very long time, thanks to my peculiar relationship with my somewhat sanctimonious daughter-in-law, Sasha. My position at the kitchen sink was steadfast. It gave me the quintessential perfect view over our street, and I was watching and waiting for only one thing, the arrival of my son Nick's black BMW, to roll up our drive. Where the hell was he, I wondered, as I washed the dishes rather cack-handedly in the sink. I wasn't paying much attention to the job at hand. Why was it when you waited for someone to arrive, time tended to stand still, like a lonely photograph, and never progressively move forward, almost as if it was stuck to one spot with superglue?
How long are you going to be there, love? Staring out at the street?
Said my husband, giving me a big sigh and looking at me quizzically from his cell phone. He stared at me through steely grey eyes, his brows crinkled together in an exasperated expression.
Honestly, look at you, sweetness. Don't you know the saying that a watch teapot never ever boils? How long have you been standing there over the kitchen sink, staring so gormlessly into the ether? By the looks of things, those dishes of yours are not going to get washed. Broken, maybe, but washed absolutely not.
I know, but washing the dishes keeps me busy, love. I can keep my eye on the street standing here. I just cannot wait to see little Oliver again. Nick is certainly taking his time to get here. What on earth is keeping him? I feel like a child at Christmas, you know, with one of those kitchen calendars with little doors that you open every day, until finally you get to Christmas. That's how I feel about seeing Oliver again. I'm so excited, I can't help myself.
They will be here soon enough, dear. Of that I am most sure. You're punishing yourself standing there at the kitchen sink, like a dog desperately waiting for his owner to get home. It's painful watching you, sweetness, if you don't mind my saying so.
Well, can you blame me, love? How long has it been since I last saw little Oliver? It's been a month since Sasha has even bothered to drop him off here at our house. I honestly don't know what Nick ever saw in that dreadfully self-centered woman. I mean, of all the women he had to marry, why on earth did he choose her? She's so awfully detached and aloof, isn't she? I've never for the life of me been able to figure that wretched woman out. What makes her tick? She's an enigma to me, you know. It's like she's got such a hoity-toity superior attitude, as if she thinks she's better than everybody else. I blame her Uncle Nick for the way she turned out. When I met him at Nick's wedding, he admitted to me he had given Sasha everything that she'd ever wanted growing up, which explains why she's so dreadfully spoilt. I think he felt sorry for her, you know, losing her parents so young. The man is absolutely loaded. He came from a humble background himself, but he got rich quick with his success in architecture. Granted, Sasha's attractive in a manner of speaking, with her peroxide blonde hair and brown eyes. Well, if you like that sort of thing. But beyond that, there's not much more to her, is there? And that chin of hers, as far as I'm concerned, it's far too pointed. It would be a plus, of course, if she actually had an engaging personality. I was very close to Nick, our son. We were as thick as thieves until she came along to muddy the waters between us. I think she turned Nick against me. I don't think she's ever liked me.
You don't know that for sure, love. Nick's a busy man these days. He probably hasn't had much time to drop in on us. Life can get ahead of us at times. Believe me, I know.
This isn't about Nick, I said indignantly. It's that dreadful wife of his. I don't like to say this to you, Laurie, but I'm sorry. I don't like her one little bit. And as for them not dropping in on us, there is absolutely no excuse. It's not like they live in another state. They're only half an hour away from us by car. So why is it so rare that I ever get the privilege of seeing my grandson? It's like Sasha is stopping him from visiting us on purpose. I know she is.
I'm sure she's not doing it deliberately, love. You're casting her in a very unfavourable light. It is true, we should see much more of our grandson than we do. But it's obviously not something they can help.
I told you, we're not going to see Oliver more than we do. That wretched woman has decided she doesn't like me, and for the life of me, I don't know why she has so much disdain towards me. I mean, what did I ever do to her?
I've tried to be the most friendly, warm, and welcoming mother-in-law, but never once has that woman responded in kind, by being remotely civil towards me in return. She treats me like a distant stranger that you might see at a bus stop or standing at the queue in the supermarket. It's very hard to try and like somebody that so obviously dislikes you. It's a two-way thing, you know. I'm sure, love, you've got it all wrong. I think Sasha's a complicated woman, that's all. She's very— Very what? I asked my husband brusquely. I don't know. A very contained, private person, I suspect. She was raised exclusively by her Uncle Nick. She never had a mother, did she? Nor did she have a father. Nick became a father to her. She was 5 years old when both her parents were tragically killed in that car crash. It can't have been easy for her. You're taking her insouciant attitude she has towards you personally. But I'm willing to bet that she's like this with everyone. It's who she is. I wouldn't be remotely surprised if she doesn't have many friends in the circumstances. She's not a desperately warm person. Even I am willing to admit that. I shook my head vigorously. You think Sasha's condescending with everyone, do you? That woman looks down on me, Laurie. I'm sorry she does. She's got one hell of a superior, vainglorious attitude, and it's because her Uncle Nick sent her to the best, most pretentious schools and colleges out there. She thinks she's all that. Whoever said there is no class distinction here in America? Let me tell you, it's alive and kicking. I'm telling you that. And Sasha Fontaine seems to think she's a little prima donna, whom everyone should idolize because she's so damn perfect. Love, you're being extremely unreasonable. I'm sure Sasha's a perfectly lovely young lady. You've misunderstood her, that's all. I don't think it's fair for you to assassinate her character. You don't know her well. Me being unreasonable? I don't think so, Laurie. That woman— I gritted my teeth together. If my son lives only half an hour away from us, we should see a whole lot more of him. And little Oliver. But we don't, thanks to that insufferable, obnoxious woman. Look, love, you're upset. You think Sasha's the reason we haven't seen Nick in a long time. You think she's keeping our grandson away from us. You resent her for that, which is perfectly understandable in the circumstances. But I think you're taking this far too personally. Family relationships, love, they're complicated at the best of times. When our children leave home, they have lives of their own to live. It's perfectly natural for parents to feel pretty redundant when their children don't appear to need them anymore. It can be upsetting, but it is what it is. Before I could respond to my husband, my heart lifted when I saw my son's black BMW rolling up our driveway and parking only yards away from the front door. He was here. Oh, my goodness, he was here. I couldn't help but rub my hands together in glee, my eyes lighting up like a Christmas tree. They're here, I said to my husband excitedly. They're here. I threw my bright yellow rubber gloves down on the sideboard next to the sink. I wiped my hands on the apron tied around my middle, which I threw haphazardly over the back of a chair. I hurriedly dashed down the passageway and bolted towards the front door, like an over-enthusiastic, ungainly dog that couldn't wait to see his owner. My heart melted when my 6-foot-tall son climbed out of his BMW and gave me a warm grin. Every time I saw my son, it was like the first time I'd held him in my arms over 37 years ago. I was filled with that bubbly, warm, fuzzy feeling that only a mother can truly appreciate, and it never ever left me, even though my son was now fully grown up. He had become a handsome-looking young man over the years, who was perfectly capable of looking after himself. Yet even when your fledglings leave the nest, the maternal instinct to watch over them never ever diminishes, no matter how old they actually become. When I studied my son, I was always struck with such pride that this debonair, very good-looking gentleman was actually my progeny, my flesh and blood. What had I done to deserve such a wonderful son?
Nick sidled towards me, throwing his arms around me in an all-embracing big hug. I could smell his aftershave. He always smelt of Kouros, that I'd bought him his first bottle when he was only 12 years old, and he never wore anything else. I held him close to me, breathing in the lovely scent. I didn't want to let him go.
It's good to see you, Mum. It's been too long. I'm afraid Sasha's been busy as a bee with the advertising company and all that. She takes charge over all of that, and she's passionate about it. But as a result, we've hardly been able to draw breath. It's been busy, busy, busy all the way, if you know what I mean. But as I keep saying to Sasha, you both live so close. We should see a lot more of you.
It would be nice if we did, son. See more of you, I admitted. I pulled away from Nick, looking warmly into his eyes, stroking the 2-day-old stubble on his chin. I noticed he had bags under his eyes. He looked very fatigued. I was surprised he hadn't bothered to shave. He was normally quite fastidious about such things, but then again, it gave him a rather rugged appearance, which rather suited him. I know what it means to be busy, love, but I worry about you a lot. Are you sure you're not working too hard? I asked. I mean, are you eating enough? I think you look rather thin, if you don't mind my saying. I do believe you've actually lost weight. You must find time to eat, Nick. Otherwise you'll waste away before my very eyes. And we can't have that, can we?
I'm fine, Mum. Really I am. You worry far too much. You know what Sasha's like. She's a bit of a health nut. She's cut back on the meat in my diet. She says we should both be eating a lot less meat and more vegetables. So these days I'm eating a lot more lentils and beans. I don't like them very much. But you know what they say, Mum. Happy wife, happy life. It's such a dreadful cliché, isn't it? But in my experience, it's absolutely true. Got to keep the wife happy.
So that's why you're looking so gaunt. You're a red-blooded male, love. Men are meant to eat more protein than women do. I don't like the fact that you're eating less meat. I don't necessarily think that's a good thing. Why don't you buy grass-fed beef or something that's terribly healthy for you? Nothing wrong with wholesome meat full of iron and healthy vitamins to make a man very strong.
Try telling that to Sasha, Mum. She's insistent that we'll be healthier eating a vegan diet. But you're right. My clothes are hanging off me. I spend half my life fantasizing over a big, red, juicy steak. But don't tell Sasha about that. She's convinced that everyone in America eats far too much red meat.
I watched my son opening the back door of the black BMW to let my grandson Oliver out. He came charging towards me like a bat out of hell, throwing his tiny little arms around my legs in a bare, enthusiastic hug, which made my heart melt like butter over hot toast. "Grammy! Grammy!" he cried out excitedly. "It's good to see you, Grammy. I missed you, Grammy, so very much. I missed you this much," he said, stretching out his hands as wide as he could. He smiled up at me with bright green eyes, framed by the longest dark eyelashes I'd ever seen. "It's good to see you too, Oliver. How have you been, my sausage?" "I'm fine, Grammy. I'm fine. Wait until I show you my new dinosaur. Mummy bought it for me to keep me company while I stay here with you and Pops for a whole week. I'm so glad I'm staying a whole week with you. If you press the button on my dinosaur's tummy, he can even speak, Grammy. I think I've got the only talking dinosaur in the whole wide world. His name is Mr. Spike." "Sounds lovely, dear. I can't wait to meet Mr. Spike in person." "Hello, Pops! Hello, Pops!" said Oliver, dashing enthusiastically over to my husband, throwing his arms around my husband's legs. And my husband, in turn, ran his hand affectionately through my grandson's frolicking dark curls.
"How are you, sport? It's very good to see you."
"I'm fine, Gramps. I'm really fine."
"Very good to hear that. Very good indeed."
"He's such a cherub, isn't he?" I said to my son, looking at my beloved grandson, with a besotted expression on my face, and a smile so wide I could have easily put a Cheshire cat to shame.
At 7 years old, I have to say, he's the splitting image of you, isn't he, when you were that age? With all that beautiful curly black hair and mischievous green eyes. It certainly takes me back in time to some wistfully nostalgic memories, let me tell you, of when you were that age. Well, that's what everybody says. They think Oliver's the splitting image of me, said Nick, looking pleased. Oh, hi, Dad. Long time no see, he said. You're telling me, said my husband with a chuckle. Good to see you, son. The prodigal son returns, does he? I watched my husband embrace our son in a warm hug, while Sasha remained resolutely in the front seat of the black BMW. She hadn't even bothered to get out to greet us. I mean, how rude can you get? I could see her staring out at us through the passenger side window, as if looking at us was tediously boring, like watching paint dry. At least she'd got the good grace to give me a cursory nod, to acknowledge that maybe I did exist after all. Why was she just sitting in the front of the car, not bothering to even get out, to so much as even say hello? So, son, how has life been treating you? My husband asked. Your mother's a tad upset, I have to say, that we haven't seen you for a while. I never said that, Laurie, I said, giving my husband a warning look with my eyes. Your father exaggerates, love. I was saying that, it would be nice to see you more often, that's all. About that, Dad, I'm sorry. We've been awfully busy, Of course you have, son. Don't apologize to me. Life sometimes gets in the way, doesn't it? If you don't mind my saying so. You look rather worn out. I hope you're getting enough sleep. I notice you've got big bags under those eyes of yours. Nick made a face. Dad, what are you like? You're as bad as Mum, both worrying about my eating and sleeping habits. I promise you I'm absolutely fine. I'm probably just burning the candle at both ends, that's all. I smiled warmly at Nick as I ruffled Oliver's buoyant dark curls with my hands, as he stood at my side for a brief moment, before finally getting distracted by a bird perching on the fence in the backyard. Look, there's a bird over there, a big bird. Well, I think you better go and see what it is, don't you? Said Nick. We're your parents, love, I told my son. We're allowed to worry about you. It's our privilege, You should know what it's like being a father yourself, now that you have a son. It would seem no matter how big your children get, you can't help but worry about them. All right, I get it, said Nick. Are you sure, Mum, that you can look after our Oliver for a week? It's not going to be too much trouble for you, is it? I don't want to burden you both with too much responsibility. I'm afraid that Oliver may look like a cherub, but don't be deceived. Not all the pretty things wrapped up in charming packages are as benign as you may think they are. He can be quite the handful, Don't say I didn't warn you about him. You need to watch him like a hawk, have eyes at the back of your head. He can be quite mischievous when he wants to be, especially when Sasha's not around to tow him into line. Oliver listens to Sasha, but I suspect staying here with his grandparents, he'll feel like a tiger that has escaped the confines of his cage, so you need to watch him all the more. Of course it's no trouble, love, to look after such a little bundle of mischief. I may have my hands full, but it will be delightful to spend a whole week with little Oliver. I feel as if I haven't seen my grandson in an age. I was pleased to see that my son had the grace to look apologetic about this. It's Sasha, Mum, he said, lowering his voice. She's very particular, about everything. That's why she wanted Oliver to stay with you for a week. She doesn't want him around on the property while the builders are adding the extension to our home. He could end up getting hurt while the builders are using heavy-duty equipment, staple guns, and so forth, if you know what I mean. Well, it's perfectly understandable that Sasha doesn't want him around on the property while that's going on. It's not good to have kids running amok on a building site, is it? There can be hidden dangers you never anticipated. Sasha's not wrong about that, son. Thanks, Mum. I really appreciate you helping us out like this,
said Nick boldly, sauntering off to the trunk of his BMW to remove Oliver's luggage, which included a big duffel bag, a box of toys, and a neatly printed file which he handed over to me.
"Here, let me help you, son,"
said my husband, charging over to the trunk of Nick's BMW and lifting out Oliver's large box of toys, with Oliver reappearing from nowhere and eagerly trotting behind him, chirruping away.
"Wait until I show you my dinosaur, Pops!" he cried out excitedly. "It's purple with pink spikes. It's cuddly. I go to bed with him every single night. His name is Mr. Spikes, 'cause he's got spikes down his back."
"Well, let's go to your bedroom, Oliver," said my husband. "You can introduce me to Mr. Spikes if you like. I've never met a dinosaur before. This will be a first."
At this Oliver chuckled with delight. My son was holding a file in his hands, which he half extended towards me. It contained many neat printed pages that he was sifting through breezily.
"Sasha drew this up for you, Mum. It's a list of instructions about what time Oliver needs to go to bed and have his bath and so forth. Then there's a list of what he's allowed to eat. He's not allowed to eat any flour products, according to my wife. But I would take that with a pinch of salt if I were you. But you never heard that from me."
"Why? Isn't Oliver allowed flour?" I asked curiously. "He hasn't got a gluten intolerance, has he?"
"I don't think so," my son whispered to me. "Sasha thinks he's gluten intolerant, but the doctor says he's a perfectly healthy 7-year-old boy. Sasha gets these strange ideas about things in her head. She's convinced he's allergic to wheat. One day, after eating a slice of cake at a kid's party, he was throwing up violently, and Sasha decided he was allergic to the wheat flour in the cake, which was ridiculous. I think he'd just eaten too much. As a result, she took Oliver to countless doctors, but all the tests gave him a clean bill of health. But of course, Sasha refuses to accept their diagnosis. She thinks they're all wrong. She doesn't trust doctors, even though she's taken Oliver to 6 doctors since in the last 6 months or so. They all agree he doesn't have a gluten intolerance. Anyway, she's drawn up a list of what Oliver can and cannot eat for you. She's very extreme, Mum," said my son, rolling his eyes in exasperation. "Don't get me wrong, Mum. I love Sasha, but she can go overboard about things sometimes. Don't pay too much attention to the list, Mum. I can assure you Oliver is not going to keel over and have an anaphylactic shock if he ingests any wheat products. Far from it, in fact. Me and the wife cannot agree on this matter. She is insistent Oliver is allergic to just about everything. I don't want him to miss out being a little 7-year-old boy. But Sasha has relegated him to carrot sticks and hummus, if you know what I mean, which is a restrictive diet for a young boy, if you ask me. I suspect she's being overprotective, but you know what mothers can be like." "Oh, yes, I do, son. Only too well. You forget I was a mother myself. Still am. And a day doesn't go by that I don't worry about you, even though you're now all grown up. It goes with the territory of being a parent. Don't be too hard on Sasha, son. It's natural for a mother to be overprotective towards her son. But it sounds as if this so-called gluten allergy is more in Sasha's head." "My thoughts exactly, Mum. As a grandparent, you have full permission to spoil Oliver rotten, as long as it doesn't get back to Sasha, if you get my drift," he said, giving me a naughty wink. "Let's just say if she thought you were giving Oliver chocolate cake, she would pretty much freak out. She's insistent he can't have any sugar. She always goes to the kids' parties with him to check that Oliver is only eating healthy stuff. I can't imagine what the parents must think, her being so strict about his dietary habits. I keep telling Sasha that this kind of restriction could backfire on us one day, when Oliver finally leaves home and decides to go ballistic over fast food, and as a consequence of such restriction, becomes morbidly obese. Surely there's got to be a healthy balance somewhere along the line, don't you think? Do you know in Auschwitz, when all those people pretty much almost starved to death, when those that survived were set free, some of them gorged themselves on chocolate so badly
that the food killed them because they overdid it. I didn't know that, son. I agree with you. Balance is definitely key. I gave my son a reassuring wink. I was sure I could see an expression of frustration on his face, which made me wonder whether Sasha's pedantic ways were wearing him down. Did he have tireless nights arguing about whether poor little Oliver was allergic to gluten or not? Was that why he looked so exhausted? Maybe the couple could not agree on the best way to raise little Oliver. I imagined it wasn't easy getting through to a capricious, stubborn wife like Sasha, with her rigidly stiff views over everything. Being married to an opinionated, difficult woman must be no walk in the park for poor Nick. I felt much empathy towards my son, as if suddenly I could fully appreciate why his visits to my home were so fleetingly infrequent. Don't worry, son. I'll read the file a little later. I just must say hello to your wife. I sauntered over to the black BMW and tapped on the window to get Sasha's attention. Sasha rolled down the window and said, "Oh, hello, Mrs. Gozeman. How are you?" "I'm very well, Sasha, and more to the point, how are you?" Sasha frowned. "You know, it's been busy, as I'm sure Nick has told you about it all. These building alterations, they're doing my head in, you know. I'm very grateful for you, Mrs. Gozeman, taking little Oliver off our hands during this chaotic week. It's dangerous for a kid to be hanging around heavy-duty machinery. I'm sure you appreciate that." Sasha was wearing dark glasses. Her blonde hair was tied back in a ponytail. She looked as glamorous as ever, but at the same time she appeared rather standoffish and aloof. "Look, Sasha, don't sit there in the car like this. Why don't you come in for a coffee or something? We haven't seen you in an age. It would be good for us girls to catch up a little." "Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Gozeman. No can do, I'm afraid. Maybe another time, perhaps. I need to speak to the architect when I get back to our house. But as usual, Nick is dilly-dallying around, delaying everything. What on earth is keeping him? All he had to do was drop off Oliver's things, but as usual he's making a song and dance about everything. We need to get back to the house in time for our appointment with the architect. We're already running late. But it's very kind of you to ask us for coffee, Mrs. Gozeman. Let's put a rain check on that, shall we? Another time, perhaps." "I understand, love. Please call me, Suzy. Mrs. Gozeman is terribly formal. You're my daughter-in-law, after all. You needn't worry about Oliver. I'll take very good care of him for you." "It's very important, Mrs. Gozeman. Oh, sorry, Suzy, that you follow the food choices in the file that I've printed out for you. Oliver has a very bad gluten intolerance. He's not allowed anything made with flour. He can't have bread of any kind. I don't want him having any sugar whatsoever. Obesity, it's a major problem here in America. You should see a couple of the kids at Oliver's school. It's too shocking for words. They're like miniature sumo wrestlers. Their mothers just feed them sugar as if it's coming out of their backsides. I mean, what's wrong with people, Mrs. Gozeman? Can't they see they're killing their own children?" "Don't worry, love. I've got the list here. I'll be sure to give it my close attention." "Make sure you do, Mrs. Gozeman. Oh, sorry, Suzy. Don't listen to Nick. He thinks I'm fussing over nothing. But I know my son. I'm a mother. If I say he's allergic to gluten, then he's allergic. Yes, we've been to various doctors about this, but what do they really know? In truth, doctors know zilch, absolutely zilch, about people's diets. I'm the one that sees my son's behaviour after he eats gluten, and it's definitely having an adverse effect on him." "Of course, love. Mothers know these things, don't they?" "Suzy, just as you don't like being called Mrs. Gozeman, I hope you don't mind if I ask you that you don't call me love again. I find it rather condescending, if you don't mind my saying so." "Of course, love. Oh, sorry, Sasha. I'm very sorry, Sasha. Don't take offence. I always call people I'm very fond of, love. It's my being affectionate, that's all. I have no intention of being belittling or patronising towards you." On the contrary, the reverse is true. Well, I would appreciate it if you called me Sasha. That's my name, after all. I even insist that my Nick calls me Sasha. I don't like being called any of these itsy-bitsy, ridiculously silly pet names. They're so dreadfully degrading. In that moment, I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. If anyone was being condescending here, it was Sasha herself. The woman certainly had a superior attitude, and I knew the first thing I would do for dinner tonight was order my little grandson a pizza. My son was right. There was no way poor little Oliver had a gluten allergy. I hate to say this, but a small vengeful part of me wanted to give my daughter-in-law the finger up, even if she couldn't see it. "Oh, sorry, Suzy. My cell phone is ringing. I hope you don't mind my getting it," she said, waving a hand at me. "I need to take it." "Yes, hello, is that you, Nick? Oh, yes, how are you?" "Oh, I'm very well, thank you very much. Busy, busy, busy. You know how it's been." Oh, awful. I'm exhausted, absolutely exhausted, and we haven't even started yet." "Well, I hope you're going to be there at the building site. I'm relying on you big time. I need you to look over the plans for me. I need you to take a careful look." Sasha began waving me away from the car window, as if she was squatting a fly. My son came casually ambling over towards me, with a big friendly smile on his face. "I guess I better get going. I'm sure Sasha's told you we have an appointment with the architect. Sasha wants to make some last-minute adjustments to the design on the property. It seems there is no rest for the wicked." He chuckled. "It's a pity, son, that you can't stay even for a moment. I never get to see you these days. I do wish you and Sasha would come in for a quick coffee." "Would love to, Mum, but I told you we haven't got the time. We'll have to put a rain check on it." "Maybe another time, love," I said, unable to disguise the disappointment. Did my son not realize how much I really missed him, ever since he'd married Sasha Fontaine, whom incidentally had insisted on keeping her original surname, claiming that Gozeman wasn't classy enough for her? I never got to see him, and there were some times in my life when I felt she'd stolen my son away from me, from right under my feet. My son threw his arms around me to embrace me in a warm hug again, and he gave me a tight, affectionate squeeze. "I love you, son," I whispered. "I love you more, Mum," he said cheekily. And when I looked at the adoring affection in my son's soulful green eyes, I knew he meant every word of it, and my spirits lifted exponentially. I felt my son's warm love for me, and it was unwavering, as it had always been. Even if Sasha had tried to steal Nick's affections away from me, the bond between a mother and son wasn't easily severed. My son loved me as much as he always had, and I had seen that love so clearly in his eyes. Maybe my husband was right. Nick lived a busy life. It stood to reason. He was a CEO of a textile company, and his wife was in charge of an advertising company. So perhaps it was unreasonable for me to expect to see more of him, or more of them, I suppose. I noticed that Nick was glancing nervously towards his wife and the black BMW, but Sasha appeared to be distracted by her phone call, and was momentarily, just totally absorbed. I saw relief wash over my son's face. He turned around, and to my amazement he whispered in my ear, "When I get a chance at some point, Mum, well, after this chaotic week is over, that is, I would like to have a little wee chat with you about something personal, without Sasha or Dad around, if you don't mind. It's personal, but I will be in touch about that in due course." My son's ominous words alarmed me considerably. What did he want to talk to me about that was so incredibly important that he didn't want even his wife Sasha to know about it? My heart began to flutter rather nervously in my chest, as my maternal apprehension, or instincts you could say, rose up from my belly to the back of my throat, so that for a brief moment I almost choked on my words. "Is everything all right, son? You're worrying me." "Oh, Mum, there's nothing to worry about," said Nick nonchalantly, brushing his lips against my cheeks affectionately, and giving me another friendly nudge. "I just want a little chat at some point with my mother, that's all. As you were saying, we haven't got together for a long time, have we? Maybe I can take you to coffee in town at some point. What's that lovely place called with the pink and white striped awning over the window and those big hanging baskets of pink petunias? Oh, you mean the gingerbread house? That's the one. I seem to remember they do a mean death by chocolate cake there. They do indeed, son. Sounds lovely. I look forward to it. Sasha, who'd wound up the window after her abrupt conversation with me, wound it down again. She was wearing a sizable frown on her face. What's wrong with you, Nick? What's keeping you, for goodness sake? We need to get back to the house at once. Or have you conveniently forgotten about the appointment? That was Uncle Nick on the cell. He wants to give us some pointers about the renovation project. He says he's looked at the designs and thinks they could be improved upon. Her uncle's an architect, my son explained to me. I think his input will be invaluable. Actually, I think he's a bit put out, because we hired another architect. I just didn't want to impose on Nick, take advantage of him, so to speak, because I knew he would do all the architectural design of our property for free, and I couldn't have that. You should see the house that Sasha grew up in as a girl. He designed it all himself. Sasha grew up with Uncle Nick. He's the one that raised her from when she was knee-high to a grasshopper. She was very little. You know her parents died in that accident. 5 years old she was. I seem to remember telling you the story. Her Uncle Nick is the only father she's ever known. But he's incredible as an architect. Absolutely incredible. I mean, he really is amazing, Mum. He's the reason I got my black BMW, by the way, at such a great price. He knows the guy who runs the dealership, so I got quite a sizable discount. He loves BMWs, drives a black one exactly the same as mine. It turns out we should have used him as our architect from the very beginning, because he's just going to change all the designs. Nick, scolded Sasha, Suzy doesn't need to listen to all this. You rambling on, especially about my childhood, for God's sake. We need to get moving. Hurry up, will you? Don't be a sloth all your life. Sorry, you're right, we need to get going, said my son, looking from me to my husband apologetically. My husband was standing in the doorway of the house, holding little Oliver's hand and smiling at Nick. Goodbye, Munchkin, said Nick, tweaking his son's chin. You be a good boy for your grandparents, will you? Of course I'll be good, said Oliver, grinning from ear to ear. You don't have to worry about me, Daddy. Grammy and Pops will look after me. Bye-bye, Mummy. Bye-bye, sweetheart. You heard your father, said Sasha. I want you to behave yourself. You won't get up to any mischief, will you? Of course not, Mummy. I'm always good. Good boy, said Sasha, rolling up the window and lifting her hand to wave at her son, and then me and my husband as an afterthought. I watched my son climbing into the car, sitting next to his wife in the driver's side seat. Sasha appeared to be saying something to him. I knew she was telling him to get a move on. My son responded in kind by pressing his foot firmly down on the accelerator, and before I knew it the black BMW was all but a speck on the horizon. I felt a throbbing sadness wash over me, even though my beautiful grandson was looking up at me with big round green eyes. What's wrong, Grammy? You look really sad. Oh, do I, sausage? I said, tweaking his chin affectionately. Now, don't mind your grandma. It's just sad to see your dad going away, that's all. Oliver looked up at me in surprise. Dad's not going away, Grammy. He'll be here in a week's time to pick me up. Of course he will, sausage. There was something so pitifully gloomy about my son this afternoon. He was 6 foot tall, but when he walked away from me, I'd noticed his shoulders were slumped over, and when he got into the car to sit next to Sasha, he had a hangdog expression on his face. I didn't know what was going on with him, but I had an instinctive, profound sense that he was miserable about something. I sneakily suspected that Sasha Fontaine was the cause of his obvious disquiet. I could not be sure, of course, but something was clearly irking him, and I needed to get to the bottom of it. I suspected the beans would be spilt when we got together for coffee in a week's time or so at the gingerbread house. I was certainly looking forward to it. I could feel a tiny cold hand slipping into mine as my grandson Oliver looked up at me with an expression of devotion on his angelic face. He was pulling me eagerly by the hand. Grammy, are you coming? I want to introduce you to Spikes, my dinosaur. You said you wanted to meet my pink and purple dinosaur. Of course I want to meet him. I'm looking forward to it very much, love. My husband smiled at me as he watched Oliver leading me by the hand into his bedroom to show me his pink and purple dinosaur. Well, isn't he lovely? I said, holding the stuffed animal to my chest. I mean, you can go to sleep with him every night. And even though he's got spikes running down his back, they don't hurt at all, do they? No, they don't. That's why Mummy bought him for me. She said while she's away, I could cuddle up to Spikes all night long. That was very nice of your Mummy, I said. Listen to this, Grammy, said Oliver, pressing the battery-controlled button on the dinosaur. I'm hungry. I want to eat leaves. Don't worry, I won't eat you. I'm vegetarian. My name is Spikes. I'm a cuddly dinosaur. I would like to be a friend of yours if I may. I promise I will be good. Watch over you when you sleep. Oliver chuckled. He's a very clever dinosaur, Grammy. He's very nice, 'cause he's vegetarian. I can see he's very nice, Oliver. It seems he'd like to sleep with you at night, and at least you can go to bed knowing he won't eat you up. Oliver chuckled. Don't be silly, Grammy. He's far too small to eat me up. I'm way bigger than he is. You are indeed. But then again, even small creatures can be very, very dangerous, you know. You mean like the colourful grass frog? I saw a programme, Grammy. You won't believe what happened to the grass frog. What happened, Sausage? Well, the bird swallowed up the grass frog, and then the bird died, and the tiny grass frog jumped out of the bird's beak. Daddy said the poison on the tiny frog's skin killed the bird. It was horrible because I cried for the frog at first, and then I cried for the bird. Well, that really is some story, Oliver. But I think you're talking about a tree frog. They're very, very tiny frogs, incredibly colourful, and they've got a very toxic, poisonous skin. So it doesn't surprise me at all that the bird died. But what an interesting story. Later that evening, I read Oliver a bedtime story, tucking him up into bed. My husband and I were sitting down together in the living room, having watched some television together. Well, that wasn't so bad, was it? What, you mean the movie? I asked my husband. I beg to differ. I didn't enjoy it at all. My husband rolled his eyes. No, sweetness, I'm not talking about the movie. Seeing Nick again. Seeing our son again, I mean. Well, it was very good to see him, but I thought he looked rather worn out and fatigued, I have to say. Well, I suspect it's down to the alterations that they're doing to their property. I'm afraid those kind of household improvements can drain you exponentially. Remember when we moved to this place and extended the kitchen? It was absolutely exhausting. We lived on takeaways for 2 weeks, do you remember? That's true, I do remember. But I still thought there was more to Nick's exhaustion than just the alterations they're doing to their house. The following morning I was preparing blueberry pancakes for breakfast, and was surprised that little Oliver was not up and about already. I was used to my grandson rising very early, but when I entered his bedroom, he was sound asleep. The strangest thing of all was the window was wide open, and frisky cool air was blowing into his room. So I reached out to close the window. I was surprised to see that there was mud on the inner pane of the window, and what looked like an imprint of my grandson's sneakers. Had Oliver climbed out of the window during the night, into the flower bed below? I could see some of the flowering shrubs had indeed been crushed, as if someone had been standing over them. It would be easy enough to get through the window if you were Oliver's size, but I told myself I was sorely mistaken. He wouldn't do that, would he? I promptly closed the window behind me and sat down next to my grandson, who suddenly opened his eyes, as if he'd sensed my presence. I noticed the seemingly unusually tired, normally sprightly 7-year-old, with his ubiquitous amount of energy, seemed very lethargic this morning, You're a sleepyhead, love. Your father tells me you're usually the first one up and about in the morning. It's 9 o'clock now. Everybody else is up except for you. 9 o'clock, Grammy, said Oliver, sitting up with a start. But I never, ever get up this late. Well, you did this morning, didn't you, Sausage? Never you mind. You were obviously very, very tired, weren't you? The good news is that in this house, you can sleep as late as you like. We don't stand on ceremony here. I was just playing all night with my new friend. That's why I was so tired, 'cause I never got much sleep. Your new friend? I said, raising a questionable brow. Who is this new friend of yours? Are you talking about Spike, your dinosaur? No, my other friend. His name's Susan. He's really nice, Grammy. Really, really nice. Susan, I said, thinking my grandson had conjured up an imaginary friend with a rather peculiar name. Well, I've never heard of such a name. It sounds foreign, certainly interesting. Is there a boy at your school with such a name? I inquired. No, silly. Susan isn't like you or me. His name is very, very special. It means warrior spirit. That's what he told me. What does my name mean, Grammy? Susan says names are very, very important. He says that names affect your whole destiny and what you become one day. He says his mother had to think about his name for many long weeks before he was even born. His whole family gathered together to decide what to call him. They chose to call him Warrior Spirit because his mummy said she could tell he was going to be very strong when he got older. You should see his mummy, Grammy. She's very, very big, he chuckled, reaching his hand up to point to the wall. You see where that picture ends? She's as tall as that. That's 10 foot, my dear. Nobody is that tall. Susan's mother is that tall, Grammy. She's very, very hairy. Sweetheart, you mustn't talk like that about a lady. It's very, very rude. But it's true. She is hairy. It may be true, love, but you don't go up to a fat person and say, hello, you're fat, do you? No, because it's not a nice thing to do. There you go. You don't go telling people they're hairy either. It's called being polite. Do you understand what I'm saying? Oliver nodded his head solemnly. But I never told her she was hairy, Grammy. Well, I'm glad to hear that then. So you saw Susan's mother, did you? I asked him curiously, wondering how far-fetched my grandson's fictitious imagination really was. He wasn't only dreaming up an imaginary friend who was about his age, but their mother as well. I saw his mummy. At first she was cross with Susan for waking me up 'cause Susan knew I was here and was tapping on the window. I woke up and I was shocked at first, Grammy, but he spoke to me in my head and told me he wanted to play with me. Well, that's very nice, love, I said, deciding that little Oliver had quite the imagination on him. But then again, he was an only child, so it made perfect sense to me that when he was lonely, he made up fictitious friends to compensate for being alone. You didn't answer my question, Grammy. Sorry, love, what question are you talking about? What does my name mean? Susan wants to know what Oliver means. Well, we will find out shortly enough, won't we? I'll look it up on Google for you. But before we do that, I want you to get dressed right away, brush your teeth, and come down to breakfast. You don't want those fluffy pancakes I've cooked for you to get cold, do you? I made them especially for you, with a blueberry compote. You're going to love them. I'm not allowed to eat pancakes, Grammy, because they have gluten. My pancakes are extra special, Oliver. They contain no gluten. You like pancakes, don't you? I love pancakes, Grammy. Yummy, yummy, yummy. It was later that morning, when my husband was doing a jigsaw puzzle with Oliver, that I went into his bedroom to make his bed up for him. I pulled back the sheets. and to my immense horror there was mud all over them, along with a few stray leaves. Worse still, his pyjamas, especially at the bottom, were filthy dirty, as if he'd been playing out of doors. I was more than a little perplexed by all of this, so I walked gingerly over to the window to examine it at closer inspection, and sure enough there was a revealing trail of dirt on the windowsill, along with a smear imprint that had obviously come from a pair of sneakers. I'd seen it earlier in the morning and dismissed it out of hand. My grandson's sneakers, furthermore, were lying beneath the window on the floor, completely congealed with mud. It had been raining a lot recently, but why were his sneakers in such a grubby state? I knew at once the answer to that question, of course. My naughty, mischievous little grandson must have sneakily climbed out of the window during the night. That's why the shrubs beneath the window were crushed. I knew little kids got up to mischief, of course I did, but a prank like this left me feeling distinctly unsettled. I didn't like the thought of little Oliver wandering around our yard in the middle of the night, even though I reasoned it was perfectly safe for him to do so. I hurriedly went to the living room, carrying my grandson's sneakers in my hands, to speak to little Oliver about his idiosyncratic nocturnal activities. "Hello, love," said my husband, looking up at me in surprise. "You should see Oliver here. He's quite nifty with this jigsaw puzzle we're doing. He seems to know which piece goes where. He's a lot better than me at doing this." "Come and see, Grammy. We're finishing a jigsaw quickly. It's of a lighthouse in Scotland, Grammy. I wish I could go there, you know."
"Well, it is a lovely, lovely, lovely jigsaw, isn't it?" I agreed. "Your pops bought that puzzle when we visited Scotland years ago."
"Did you visit this lighthouse, Grammy? The one in the picture here?"
"We did indeed. It had hundreds and hundreds of stairs. By the time I climbed to the top, I thought I would pass out. Isn't that right, Laurie?" My husband nodded. "Your Grammy couldn't cope with all those stairs. She was huffing and puffing all the way up."
"Like this?"
asked Oliver, beginning to blow out warm air from his lungs. "Exactly like that," I said, to which Oliver began to chuckle. My husband looked up at me quizzically. "What are you doing there, love, with those dirty sneakers in your hands?" "Are those Oliver's sneakers?" my husband asked. "They're covered in mud. How on earth did that happen?" "I just want to know the answer to the question myself, Oliver. How did you get your sneakers so filthy dirty? I also noticed, Sausage, that your pyjamas and bed sheets were absolutely covered in mud. Did you happen to sneak out of the window during the night? Now, I'm not going to be angry with you. I just need to know the answer. I noticed the shrubs beneath the window were rather crushed." Oliver hung his head in shame.
"I told you, Grammy. I was playing with Susan last night. There's been lots of rain. It's muddy everywhere. I'm sorry if I made a big mess."
"Sausage, don't apologize. I don't mind cleaning up after you. But I don't think it's a very good idea to go playing with Susan in the middle of the night. If you want to play with him, do so during daylight hours in your bedroom. You need to sleep, love, or you'll be exhausted during the day. I mean, look what time you got up this morning. You've never been up that late before, have you?" My grandson did not answer me, but he did have the grace to look rather bashful. My husband gave me a puzzled, rather bemused look, as if he was wondering what the hell I was talking about. I don't think he completely grasped that his grandson had been climbing through the bedroom window in the middle of the night to go and play with a make-believe invisible friend that didn't even exist. Was he an insomniac, I wondered? This was news to me.
"Grammy, you never told me what Oliver means. You said you would look it up on Google. I need to tell Susan what it means."
I decided that Susan was obviously an imaginary friend. I mean, what else could he be? And for some reason my grandson was going exploring in the middle of the night by climbing sneakily out of the window. Maybe it was a novelty to him to be able to easily climb out of a window, given he lived in a double-story house at home. My son was right. It would seem Oliver was a bundle of mischief,
and I'd have to keep a beady eye on him. From now on, I had promptly decided I'd make absolutely certain that I locked his window every night, so he couldn't get any funny ideas and go crawling out of the window again. I mean, I couldn't blame him for behaving like this. I imagine living with Sasha Fontaine was like living a sheltered existence with rigidly strict rules. No wonder the poor kid rebelled. I'd likely have done the same if I'd been raised by such a controlling mother. I decided to say nothing more about the matter, as enigmatic as it was, as I was resolutely determined I was not going to put my poor mollycoddled grandson on a leash. "You wanted to know what your name means, Oliver? Well, I looked it up on Google for you. Oliver means olive tree. It's a lovely name," I told him. Oliver looked disappointed. "That's horrible, Grammy, really horrible. I don't want to be a silly tree. Susan's name means warrior spirit. My name is just a tree. That is so boring." "I don't agree, love. Trees are spectacular, and olive trees, let me tell you, are very, very beautiful." The following evening, when me and my husband had gone to bed, I bolted the window shut in my grandson's bedroom, and after I kissed him tenderly good night, I retired to the living room to watch a nature program on television with my husband. "What was all that stuff about Oliver's sneakers?" he asked me. "They were coated in mud." I shrugged my shoulders. "I think he sneakily climbed out of the window during the night, to play with a so-called imaginary friend, if you like. He must have put his sneakers on. His pyjamas and bed sheets were filthy dirty, let me tell you. Nick wasn't wrong about him. You need to have eyes in the back of your head with that one. I don't think he's afraid of the dark either, like I was when I was his age." "What?" I know. Don't worry about it, love. I bolted the window shut so Oliver can't get out or up to any of his tricks again. But can you blame him? I mean, with a mother like Sasha. When he comes here, he feels like a bird in a gilded cage that is finally set free to fly again. No wonder he sneaks out of the window when the cat's away. The mice do play, don't they say that? I know it's cliché, but it's certainly true." "Well, what harm can it really do, love, when you think about it?" said my husband, beginning to physically relax. "Nobody goes into that backyard of ours. And provided he doesn't venture further afield into the wood groves behind the grove belonging to that farmer, well, then I think we should go easy on the boy. When I was a child, I was always sneaking out of the house, I'll let you know. But we mustn't let it happen again. I don't think it's a good idea. The boy needs a good night's sleep, doesn't he? You're right, if Sasha wasn't so damn strict, the poor little mite would not be so eager to do the things he's clearly not allowed to do at home. Sasha makes him wear a straitjacket." "My thoughts exactly," I said. "And all this stuff and nonsense about Oliver being gluten intolerant. My foot! He ate an entire piece of chocolate cake and was absolutely fine." "Of course he was fine. But Sasha's got these wild notions that a 7-year-old boy should be living on lentils and carrot sticks. I mean, if she carries on this way, denying him the privileges of other children, one day he will rebel, and God forbid, will likely wolf everything he wasn't allowed to eat down like a street dog, and as a consequence become as large as a beluga whale." "Hear that?" said my husband suddenly, looking at me with a start. "Hear what?" I asked. "I don't hear anything, love." "It's a car rolling up our drive," said my husband, walking over to the living room window and pulling back the curtain swiftly. "You've got to be kidding me." "What is it, love?" "It's the police." "The police? Are you sure?" "I am very sure it is the police. They're parking outside our front door. What the hell could they possibly want at this time of night?" My husband and I exchanged disquieted looks, and then we heard the ominous knock at the front door. I could feel the bile rising up in the back of my throat. Surely no good thing could come from receiving a visit from the police in the middle of the night. Could something untoward have happened to my Nick? Please, God, no.
Don't you worry, love, about this. You stay there. I'll see what this is all about. Don't you go worrying, love. It's probably nothing.
Before long, my husband was leading 2 police officers into our living room, and by the grim expressions on their faces, I knew that their visit was not nothing. I knew the news they had to convey to us. Whatever it was, it could not be good.
This is my wife, Suzy, said my husband. Could you please tell us what is going on, officers? Let me first establish that you are both Mr. and Mrs. Gozeman, the parents of Nick Gozeman, who's married to Sasha Fontaine. Is that right? That is right, said my husband. Well, I'm afraid to tell you, sir, there's been a car accident on the dual carriageway. I'm sorry to inform you, but your son and his wife were involved in a head-on collision.
Oh, my goodness, I gasped. Are they all right? They're not dead, are they? Please, no, not my Nick.
They're alive, ma'am. Both of them are. But they've been seriously injured, I'm afraid. It was a dreadful accident, let me tell you. The black BMW your son was driving was a complete write-off. They are very lucky to be alive.
I let out a shrill scream and fainted. Everything after that went black, and the day that followed was a blur, as if I wasn't even participating in it. It was almost as if it went by without me even noticing. I seem to remember visiting my son in hospital. That I do remember very, very vaguely, while our kindly neighbour stayed in the house to watch over little Oliver for us. I was unable to recognise my son. His face was swollen and puffy and double its size, and he was attached to so many tubes, and the same could be said for poor Sasha Fontaine. They both looked pretty beat up, and had undergone numerous operations, but I could not keep track of all the procedures they had to go through. It went all over my head. All I cared about that Nick was going to be all right. Nothing else mattered at all. I seem to recall telling the doctor that there had to be some grievous mistake here, that body lying in the bed, the mangled-looking body that I barely recognised, did not belong to my son, but regretfully it did. I had no idea what they'd been doing in the car on that dual carriageway, but I suspected that maybe they'd gone out to dinner that night, or even a concert. I knew my son was most insistent in treating Sasha to a date night once a week. I was told by the police that a car going in a different direction zigzagged onto the opposite lane and charged straight into my son's black BMW. Both my son and his wife were extracted from the vehicle by the jaws of life, so the fact that my son Nick was attached to these breathing tubes was infinitely better than seeing his corpse lying in a body bag. It would seem the driver of the other car had got off extremely lightly, was barely injured, with only a few cuts and scrapes, which really does boggle the mind.
Mrs. Gozeman, said the doctor to me, your son and your daughter-in-law are very lucky to have escaped with their lives. But it is still going to be a long road to recovery, I'm afraid. I mean, your son is far worse off than Sasha. I think we can safely say they are both out of the woods now.
The doctor's words brought me such relief. I do recall throwing my arms around him in gratitude. I knew that for the next few weeks that little Oliver would be staying with us indefinitely, but telling him about his parents' fortuitous accident was something that concerned me greatly. How do you tell your little grandchild that their parents are barely recognisable, but at least they were alive, and that was all that actually mattered? So I was extremely grateful for small mercies. 3 mornings later I still had not plucked up the courage to tell little Oliver about his parents' accident, but now was as good a time as any. I gingerly slipped into Oliver's bedroom. I was stunned to see the window was wide open. When I had locked it 3 nights earlier, there was mud all over the pane again, and I realised he must have sneaked out of the window during the night. Once again his sneakers were congealed with mud. The boy was incorrigible. What was this fixation he had to climb out of his bedroom window in the middle of the night for? Furthermore, how had he managed to open a bolted window? Oliver sat up in bed when he saw I'd entered his room. I noticed he looked once again extremely fatigued, like someone who's been deprived of a good night's sleep. "What's the matter, Grammy? Your eyes are red. Have you been crying? Are you sad?" "Maybe I'm just a little sad, Oliver. I need to tell you something," I said, taking my grandson's hand in mine. "Your mum and dad were involved in a car accident on the dual carriageway about 3 nights ago. Do you remember when Mrs. Boulder came to babysit you?" Oliver nodded. "It happened then. We had to rush off to see your parents in hospital. The police came to tell us they'd been in, a very bad accident." "Where are they now, Grammy?" "They're in hospital, I'm afraid, Sausage." "Are they going to be all right, Grammy?" asked Oliver, tears springing down his cheeks. "They're going to be fine, Sausage," I said, wrapping Oliver in my arms, hugging him close to me. It takes time for the body to heal. But I've been visiting your dad for 3 days now, and he's recovering very well, and the doctor says they're both going to be fine, both your mother and father." "You mean like when I fall over and graze my knee, and it really hurts? Is Daddy hurting like that? Sometimes it can take a long time to grow a full scab, "That's right, my love. Your parents are going to take quite some time to get fully better." It was in that moment that I noticed the dreadful state of Oliver's bed. "Why are there leaves in your hair, Sausage? And there's mud on the window pane. The window's wide open. I locked it 3 days ago. How did you get out of the window last night, Oliver?" "It was easy to open," said Oliver proudly. "I was playing with Susan last night, Grammy. Please don't be cross with me. Guess what? When I told Susan my name means olive tree, do you know what he said?" "What did he say, Sausage?" I asked, looking at my grandson through wilting eyes. How could I possibly scold him for his naughty behaviour when I'd just imparted such dreadful news to him that I had been cowardice to share with him until now? I was surprised he'd taken the news so well. I couldn't help but feel annoyed that he had gone out at night again. What on earth was he thinking? He was only 7 years old, for goodness sake. The little rogue had industriously managed to escape through the window by unlocking it. How he'd done this, I couldn't comprehend. The little boy was more resourceful than I ever gave him credit for. "Well, Grammy, Susan says that my name is very, very special because trees are special and an olive tree is a spiritual tree." "Well, there you go, then. Your name has a very beautiful meaning, doesn't it? I told you Oliver is a lovely name." I was privately wondering if an invisible friend would tell my grandson something so insightful like this, but I brushed those thoughts under the carpet, as my mind was centred over my son's recuperation in hospital. "What's that, love, over there on the floor?" I asked. "That sparkling thing. It looks like a lady's bracelet. What is it doing among your toys, Sausage? It's a piece of your mummy's jewellery, isn't it? It looks expensive. What is it doing here?" "Oh, Grammy, please don't tell Mummy about this, 'cause she'd be very cross if she knew, and when Mummy's cross, she can be really horrible. I shouldn't have done it, but I took it from her bureau when she wasn't looking. She hid it away in her secret drawer. I didn't even know that our bureau had a secret drawer, but I saw it, and then I went to look, and I like it because it sparkles. I know I'm not a girl, but I like to look at it because it has 3 pretty stones in the front. It reminds me of my best marble, but I'd never wear it because I'm not a sissy." "Of course you're not a sissy, Sausage. Whoever said that to you? You're allowed to admire beautiful things, you know. I'm sure your mummy wouldn't be happy with you taking her bracelet, though. I mean, it does look rather special." I went over to retrieve the bracelet that was casually splayed out on the bedroom floor and inspected it more closely. "This is very lovely. Where did your mummy get it, do you know?" Oliver shrugged his shoulders nonchalantly. "I told you, I found it in her secret drawer. She doesn't know I know about it. But I forgot to put it back." Well, when you get home, you must put it back, Sausage, where you found it. I won't tell your mummy about it. It'll be our little secret. Thank you, Grammy. You're the very best. I promise you I will put it back. Make sure you do, Sausage. I wouldn't want you getting into trouble with your mummy. As I was studying the smooth silver bracelet in my hand, a name in the back of the bracelet got my immediate attention. Mariette Marlowe Lane, followed by the words, I love you forever. My blood ran cold when I saw the name on the back of the bracelet. Mariette Margot Lane was the name of a woman found bludgeoned to death that I'd heard about on the local radio. Her body had been found in an alleyway close to a parking lot, where her car had been parked on a shopping trip to the local town. It had been all over the radio and local news broadcasts. No one knew what had happened to the lovely lady, but Mariette's husband had said one of the things missing at the scene was a thick silver bracelet that he had given his wife, that she never ever took off her wrist, with her full married name engraved on the back, and of course the words, I love you forever. There was no doubt in my mind that I was holding the precious bracelet of a deceased woman in my hand, Mariette Margot Lane, whose pretty face had been splashed all over the papers. The thought made my skin crawl, and a very bitter taste of nausea made its home at the back of my throat. I had listened to enough crime dramas over the years on television to know all too well that murderers would often keep a trinket from the victim that they had slaughtered or killed, as an insidious, macabre memento. This bracelet unequivocally came from the deceased woman's corpse, and why on earth did my son's wife Sasha have this bracelet in her possession, and furthermore was clandestinely hiding it in a secret drawer in her bureau that her son had uncovered? Had my son given it to her by any chance? But if that were indeed the case, where did he get it from? Did someone sell it to him on the street? But my son would never be foolish enough to buy stolen jewelry from someone. He knew better than that. And besides, he was not an unethical person like that, and only a fool ever bought stolen goods. I began to panic, as the person who had killed Mariette must have indeed been a man. They said she'd been brutally killed with a brick flung against her head. She was found lying deceased in an alleyway not too far from a parking lot, and her fortuitous death was splayed all over the news, with great attention drawn to the missing bracelet that they believed the murderer had taken off her person. Please God, my son didn't have anything to do with this. My son Nick was not capable of hurting another human being. But then again, why would Sasha be hiding a dead woman's bracelet that would likely be of great interest to the police investigation, that by all accounts had reached a dead end? Before his car accident, my son had been behaving strangely. He seemed eager to meet up with me for coffee at the gingerbread house, to tell me something of great significance. Please God, it had nothing to do with this dead woman and her bracelet. My son Nick had looked worn out and fatigued of late when I saw him last. Something had been weighing heavily on his heart, almost as if he was carrying a burden he wanted to unload. I think there had been a frightened look in his eyes, now that I came to think of it, as if he'd got himself ensnared into a sticky situation, of which there was no escape. My son Nick was not capable of harming anybody. He was one of the kindest people I knew. But then again, his wife Sasha Fontaine, she was as hard as nails. Was she in some way behind the mysterious death of Mariette Margot Lane? And was my son protecting her in some way? The thoughts kept whirling around in my head. I knew on my next visit to the hospital I would need to get to the bottom of this enigmatic mystery. The bracelet could be vital evidence in a crime scene investigation. I think I'm going to hang on to this bracelet for a while, Oliver. Just, to keep it safe, that's all. Suzanne and his mum also like the bracelet, Grammy. They think it's very pretty. I showed it to them, and they tried to put it on, but they couldn't fit it on their wrists, 'cause their wrists are so very big, said Oliver, chuckling. Look, love, you can't play with Suzanne at night. Can you not play with him during the day? I don't like you getting out of your window during the night. I would much prefer it if you would do that. But I don't think so, because he likes to sleep during the day, but I could always ask him. Well, then you do that, love. I genuinely believed that Sujan was my grandson's invisible friend. I knew kids on their own often made up invisible friends to play with. You heard about it often enough. But climbing out of the window at night to play games with a made-up friend was ridiculous as far as I was concerned. I unequivocally knew that if Sasha had any idea that her son was slipping out of our window every night, she would not be best pleased with me. I did not want to sour a fragile friendship with her, if you could call it that. It was later during the night I woke up to get some hot cocoa for myself. Sleep did not come easily to me that night, as all I could restlessly think about was my son and the dead woman's mysterious bracelet. I visited Nick regularly at the hospital, and he barely realized I was even there. But he was making steady, ongoing progress, and that was all that mattered as far as I was concerned. But it did not stop me from incessantly worrying as you do. On my way to the kitchen, I discreetly opened Oliver's bedroom door, only to find, to my horror, that the window to his bedroom was wide open again. The curtains were whipping against the pane, as there was quite a brisk wind blowing that evening. My grandson was not in his bed. I noticed Spikes, his beloved dinosaur, was lying abandoned on the floor upside down, almost as if he had lost favour with my grandson, who seemed to prefer the company of his fictitious friend Sujan. I felt extremely annoyed with little Oliver. I couldn't help myself for this reckless disobedience of climbing out of the window at night. What was up with that boy? How could I stop this incongruous behaviour? I had specifically told him that he could not go off at night to play with this invisible friend of his. He was, as a result, defying all my rules. I knew this was all Sasha's fault. My grandson was being decidedly mischievous, because at his home he was subjected to the rigidly strict rules of a draconian mother, who had such a tight hold and grip over his life that the poor boy could barely breathe. Now he was staying with us. He felt more independent, more free to do as he pleased, to express himself without getting into trouble, and he was making the most of this freedom. I felt very disquieted about my grandson's absence from his bedroom, but I knew in my gut he couldn't be very far away. I wondered if my venturesome grandson might possibly be suffering from insomnia, something that his parents weren't even aware of. I was exceedingly worried that he might be impetuously playing around in the yard at night, without being supervised by adults. I hope he had not foolishly, imprudently climbed under the wooden rail fence to go exploring the extensive groves of woods that stretched out over a sizable amount of land. It was all private property that belonged to a wealthy farmer. I was sure he would not rashly do something like that. But then again, how well did I really know my little grandson? I remembered when I was his age, I'd never have ventured out of doors. I wouldn't have dared to do such a thing, let alone climb out of my own bedroom window. I'd have been far too scared to do something as incautious as that. But Oliver was not like a lot of 7-year-old kids his age. He was not intimidated, nor did he scare very easily. He seemed to have an unbridled, adventurous personality that could not be tamed. I do remember Nick telling me that 6 months ago on a shopping trip, Oliver had all but disappeared. Nick was to find him in a toy store, playing with a train set, totally untroubled about the distress he'd actually caused. I decided not to wake my husband up. I mean, what was the point of that? He'd only think I'd not been taking good enough care of Oliver, and in some way it was my fault that the boy had wandered off in the middle of the night to play make-believe with his friend. I retreated back to my bedroom and quickly fumbled around in my cupboard for a pair of sneakers to wear out of doors, hoping to goodness I wouldn't wake up my husband in the process. I then rather gingerly wrapped my dressing gown around my middle, and then I padded rather cautiously down the passageway to the kitchen door, where I made my way discreetly out of the house, using a high-powered torch to guide my way. I was greeted to a brisk breeze punnelling my cheeks. The air was slightly cool, but not enough to get cold. I didn't want to call out Oliver's name, lest I should wake up my husband. When I could not find him in the yard, I realized he must have climbed under the fence to get into the grove, so my worst fears were then confirmed. I was going to be trespassing onto private property, just in order to find him, But it couldn't be helped. I had to do it. I needed to find Oliver quickly. That wretched boy was driving me completely potty. Was there no end to his naughtiness? I crawled under the fence and followed a distinctive trail through the trees. The footpath was unfortunately rather muddy, so my sneakers got filthy. I felt what I can only describe as a huge monumental sense of relief when I heard Oliver's familiar voice. He was chattering away garrulously to himself, as if he was having the time of his life. I mean, what was that boy like? He was absolutely incorrigible. I felt like I wanted to wring his neck.
Well, why don't we play hide and seek? I love playing hide and seek. It's the best game in the world.
I quietly moved towards Oliver to make certain he didn't see my clandestine approach. I guess I wanted a sneak preview of watching him play his game of make-believe. I was curious. I gasped in absolute astonishment, for my grandson was not alone. So much for this so-called fictitious friend of his. My grandson was playing with a juvenile Bigfoot. For a moment I thought I had to be dreaming. Could this really be happening? But I can assure you it most certainly was. "Oliver!" I called out to him. "Get back here now, will you? You're not supposed to leave your bedroom in the middle of the night. I thought I told you this. You should be in bed fast asleep, like most children your age. You've been very disobedient, and I'm not happy about this."
Sorry, Grammy, but Suzanne wanted to play with me.
"Oliver, you're supposed to sleep at night. That is what your bed is for." Oliver cocked his head sheepishly.
Sorry, Grammy, but we're having fun together. We were going to play hide and seek before you came along, but Susan is very good at hiding. Sometimes he can be so still you don't even see him when he's standing right in front of you. I wish I could hide like he does, Grammy.
The little Bigfoot was looking at me through wide, dark, rather frightened eyes. It was clear he was not comfortable with my presence. He was only about 3 foot tall, but with a face so human it took me off guard. I was not frightened of him at all, but more intrigued and rather curious. The little Bigfoot obviously was benevolent. He was like any other regular boy you might meet on the street, only covered in dark hair. His head was pyramid-shaped. His neck was so short you could barely see it, and his arms decidedly long. He looked at Oliver, and I think some type of telepathic exchange was taking place between the two of them, because Oliver said,
Suzanne wants to go. He's frightened of you, Grammy. I told him you're nice, but he says he can tell you're angry, and he doesn't like angry energy.
I watched the little Bigfoot bolting away, and felt rather bad for the poor thing, because I'd scared him off. I hadn't meant to do that, but meeting him had been such a shock for me. I told my grandson that I wasn't best pleased with his behaviour. "You know you shouldn't play with Suzanne, love. You're my responsibility. You know nothing about him. I think he lives in the woods, but you can't come here in the middle of the night. You could be harmed. There are coyotes and stuff like that around here. It's not safe. And besides anything else, this is private property, and you're trespassing. If that farmer knew what you were doing, he would not be best pleased with you."
But it's safe here, Mummy. Suzanne's mother watches over us. She's very big. Susan says the coyotes are very scared of her. She scares away the wild animals. I bent down on my knees to hold my grandson in my arms, and to hold him close. "If you start climbing out of the window during the night, I'll have to tell your mother about it. And you don't want me to have to do that. But if this naughty behaviour carries on, Oliver, you'll give me no choice in the matter." Oliver's eyes grew round. My mummy's so strict, Grammy. Please don't tell her. She'll be very, very angry with me. Then she'll never allow me to stay here with you again.
"Well, I won't tell her if you promise me that you won't play with Susan again. I'm sure he's a very nice friend, but I need you to sleep in your bed at night."
But what if he comes tapping on my window like he did on the first night here? He'll be very upset if I don't want to play with him.
"Then tell him you need to sleep. Do you understand what I'm saying?" My grandson nodded sorrowfully. I led him back to the house, feeling completely bewildered by the strange idiosyncratic events of that night. I decided I would not share them with my husband, lest he thought I'd lost leave of my senses. I mean, would he ever believe me if I told him what I'd seen, and that our grandson had befriended a juvenile Bigfoot? I seriously doubted it. My mind kept wandering to the bracelet my grandson had acquired, that Sasha had secretly hidden in her bureau.
I needed to find out exactly what was going on, but I knew I would only be able to visit the hospital later the following afternoon. I had been informed by the hospital that my son would be having another one of those operations and was being prepped for surgery, so I'd only be able to visit him much later. When I arrived at the hospital in the afternoon, Nick was breathing on his own, thank goodness, but was still connected to a heart monitor. He looked as if he'd been pulverized within an inch of his life, and was worse for wear. Some of his bruises had become distinctly purple in hue, making him look 1,000 times worse than when he was initially brought into hospital. He was woozy from the anaesthesia, and one of his heavily plastered legs was lifted up in stirrups. "I'm only allowing you in because you're family, ma'am," said the nurse, "but your son needs lots and lots of rest, so he can't see too many visitors. He's very, very woozy, but even if he's sleeping you can still talk to him. I'm sure he'll still be able to hear you. But as I say, your visit cannot be long. It's not good for our patient." "Hello, son," I said, standing over Nick's bed. His eyes were closed, but beneath his swollen, cracked lips I heard him say, "Hello, ma'am," and my heart melted at his words. I was heartily relieved to hear him speak again, as on all my other visits he had seemed rather uncommunicative. "Son, look at you, you poor, poor thing. You gave us quite the shock, you did. I've been visiting you now for 3 days, and you've been out for the count. You probably didn't even know I was here. Your father was with me on all those occasions, except now. He's busy at the moment. I barely recognize you, love. You're in such a sorry state, and your bruising is too dreadful for words. What on earth happened to you on that dreadful accident? Do you realize how lucky you are to be alive? The good news is the doctor says you're going to make a full recovery. It's going to be a long, lengthy process, but you're going to get there in the end. And at the end of the day, love, that's all that matters. I will go and see your wife in a moment, although I don't know if Sasha will appreciate my visit. Just so you know, you have nothing to worry about in regards to little Oliver. He sends you lots of love. He's doing remarkably well. Of course, he was dreadfully upset to learn about the accident. But when I told him you were going to be as right as rain, he took it all very well, in his stride, you could say. I'm amazed how resilient that little boy of yours is. He's quite a brave little soldier. He doesn't appear to be afraid of anything. It boggles the mind." I drew in a deep breath, pausing for a moment, and then I boldly said what I came here to say. "There's something I rather need to talk to you about, son. It's a bit sensitive, I'm afraid, but extremely important," I said, fumbling around in my purse to pull out the silver bracelet. "I know your eyes are currently closed, and I would like you to keep it that way because you need to rest. You're very, very tired. Given what you've been through, I'm not surprised. So I'll tell you what I'm holding in my hands. This is a silver bracelet with 3 stones on the front and an engraving on the inside. That little Oliver, your son, said that Sasha hid in a secret drawer in her bureau. The problem is, Nick, this bracelet belongs to a woman called Mariette Margot Lane. I don't know if you've ever heard of the name before, son. I have to tell you that this poor woman was bludgeoned to death by a brick being flung against her body. She was found in a sequestered alleyway in town, close to the parking lot. I do not know what Sasha was doing with this bracelet in her possession, but this is very serious. I'm holding crime scene evidence in my hand, which concerns me greatly. I am given to understand that this charming silver bracelet was missing from Mariette Margot Lane's body when it was recovered. The police emphatically believe that the murderer took the bracelet as some kind of memento. They've asked the public to come forward if they see any sight or sound of this bracelet. What I want to know, Nick, is what on earth is your wife Sasha doing with a dead woman's bracelet in her possession? What is going on, son?
Is there something I should know? I'm your mother, you know you can tell me anything. There is nothing in this world that you could ever do or say that could possibly make me love you less, and I hope you realize that, Nick. I know you wanted to meet me before the accident, at the gingerbread house, don't you remember? Was it because you wanted to talk about the deceased woman, and how your wife so happens to be in possession of her silver bracelet? You've got to admit, love, this doesn't look good. I don't know what to make of any of this, and it's worrying me greatly. I don't want to put you under stress, because I know you're recovering, but I needed to address this matter with you.
My son's eyes bolted right open. He began to mumble something in earnest, but I could not hear what he was saying. Nick, speak up. I can't hear a word you're saying, love. Can you speak more clearly? Try and speak more clearly. It's very important.
Get rid of it.
All of a sudden, the heart monitor he was attached to went ballistic. The nurse ran over to me, wearing on her face a formidable frown. She shook her head in exasperation, as if I was a fox that had entered a chicken coop and was deliberately causing disarray. Ma'am, what's going on here? Your son's heart rate monitor has shot right up. His heart rate is going through the roof. Perhaps you need to go. We can't afford to stress out the patient. What on earth did you say to him to make him so upset like this? Nothing, I lied. I can't understand what's going on. It's very strange. Well, it is strange, isn't it? Because I haven't seen the heart monitor going ballistic like this before, unless a patient is terribly stressed. You need to go at once, ma'am. Your son needs to heal. He's been in a terrible car accident, I'd like to remind you, and we don't need any setbacks in his healing. I found myself being ferried out of the hospital ward by the nurse, who was not enamoured with me, but my son's words that I'd managed to pick up were already beginning to haunt me.
Get rid of it,
he had growled.
You must get rid of that bracelet.
It would seem that Sasha was in the same hospital, but in a different wing, so I was intent on paying her a visit. She was faring better than Nick, and was doing reasonably well. I guess I suspected my son would have been worse off in the accident, as he was, of course, in the driver's seat. When I told the nurse I wanted to pay Sasha Fontaine a visit, she told me that Sasha had requested to see no visitors, and it was in her best interest to get as much rest as possible to facilitate her healing. She's been badly injured, ma'am. She's recovering very well, I have to say, but still in a lot of pain. She specifically told me she doesn't want any visitors, not even close family or friends. She needs lots of time to rest. She was injured badly in that accident. By all accounts, she's very lucky to be alive. We can't forget that in a hurry. That was some accident that she was involved in. I tried to think quickly on my feet. What could I say to persuade the nurse to let me see Sasha? Well, it's very important, nurse, that I speak with Sasha. It's about her 7-year-old son, Oliver, and I'm afraid it just can't wait. About her son, you say? Asked the nurse, raising a brow. Is it important? Yes, it's very important. It can't wait, as I was saying. It's a small, rather delicate matter that I need to talk to her about. Sasha's very particular, you see, about her routines with her son. I need to speak to her urgently about a little issue concerning Oliver. The nurse's face softened. Well, I suppose if it's about her son, she'll be willing to see you, but I need you to promise me you'll make it very, very quick. It doesn't do to go upsetting the patients when they're trying to recuperate and recover. Well, I won't be long, I assured the nurse. As I entered the hospital ward, Sasha was sleeping against some puffed-up pillows. Her eyes were closed. Sasha, said the nurse, you've got a visitor. Sasha looked up at me, with a deep frown developing on her face, when she recognized who had come to see her. I barely recognized her at all. Her face was distended and puffy, very swollen. In fact, she was so bloated on her left cheek, she rather reminded me of a chipmunk that had stuffed one side of its face with acorns. Her scorched skin was covered in cuts and bruises, and her withered, rather limp arm was held up in a sling. What's she doing here, nurse? I thought I told you I don't want any visitors. Are you dim or something? I want you to get rid of her now. The nurse wilfully ignored Sasha's insolent discourtesy. She said very gingerly,
I'm so sorry, Sasha. This lady, I understand, is your mother-in-law, who's looking after your little boy Oliver, I believe. She needs to speak to you about a rather delicate matter concerning your son, and in the circumstances I thought you might want to speak to her, given it concerns your little boy. That's in her charge, I believe. Well, what about him? Asked Sasha, sitting up with a jolt. Is my son all right? Is he all right? Calm down. He's absolutely fine, Sasha, I said circumspectly. Oliver sends you lots and lots of love. He's very upset that you had a dreadful car accident, but I told him you're going to be just fine. You mustn't worry about a thing. We're going to watch over him very carefully for you. Take him to school and that sort of thing. Keep his routines as structured as possible. You didn't go feeding him gluten, did you? I should have guessed you wouldn't listen to me. Nobody believes a word when I say he's gluten intolerant, but he is. What happened? Did you have to go to hospital for a stomach pump or something? Sasha, your son is absolutely fine, I repeated. He hasn't had any allergies, if that's what you're worried about. Nothing of the sort, in fact, and he certainly hasn't needed his stomach pumping. Relief washed over Sasha's face. Well then, what's wrong? Why are you here, Suzy? She asked me curtly. Can you not see I need my rest? I was beaten to a pulp in that car accident, I'll have you know. Thrown around like sardines in a can. Can you not respect that? Every part of my body is in absolute agony. You've no idea what it's like to be in such crippling pain, especially when the painkillers wear off. Whatever you have to say, Suzy, you better make it quick and then go. Sasha, I'm your mother-in-law. Believe it or not, I care about you a great deal. You're my son's wife and part of my family. How are you doing? How am I doing? She asked me incredulously, staring at me through disbelieving rounded eyes, as if she couldn't grasp the fact that I had the audacity to ask such a stupid question. Look at me, Suzy. Look at my body. I'm sure you barely recognize me. How do you think I'm doing? Well, you are beaten up, Sasha. You have looked a lot better. But the good news is you're faring even better than Nick. And that's supposed to make me feel better, is it, Suzy? That I came off better than my husband did? You're pathetic, you know that. Sweetheart, well, sorry, Sasha. It didn't come out the right way, and I must apologize for that. What I'm trying to say is that both of you are going to be fine. You were lucky to escape with your lives, and we need to be thankful for that. I'm just so grateful that you both weren't killed in that accident. From what I gather, it was a close call. What exactly happened? You mean the police didn't tell you? Said Sasha scathingly. That is so typical. Why does that not surprise me? Well, let me put you firmly in the picture, shall I, Suzy? Some big idiot on the dual carriageway was driving so fast he lost control of his vehicle and went right through us like a rocket out of hell. In the opposite direction, I might tell you. We didn't stand a chance. He was driving at a ludicrously high speed, not looking where he was going. In that moment I was caught off guard, for a tear rolled down Sasha's cheek, and up until that moment I thought the woman was like a stuffed teddy bear, devoid of any emotions. But the Sasha I was seeing now was like a vulnerable little girl, wrapped up in a woman's body. Sasha looked at me through misted eyes. She wiped away a tear. I remember thinking this was it. Those few seconds before that stupid man came plunging right through us. He wasn't drunk or anything, just driving so fast. What's wrong with people, Suzy? Why can't they drive at the speed limit? If the man had actually bothered to watch where he was going and slowed down a little, we might not have ended up in this dreadful collision. He told the police that at a high speed his cell phone that he was obviously talking on had slipped out of his hand. He bent down to retrieve it, taking his eye off the road. You should never ever do that. At the same time, he was driving at an insane speed. Everybody was hooting at him. He just zigzagged across the road and went right into us. I still remember the noise, said Sasha, shuddering. The crash of metal, the moment of impact. It seemed to last forever, as if those few seconds were extended into hours. And in that moment, I just knew I was going to die. I felt sad, you know. I thought I didn't want to go like this. I had a little boy, my whole life ahead of me. And now this was it. But what could I do? I guess in that second, I knew it was over for me, and there was not a jot I could do to stop the inevitable. I did not imagine for a moment that I could possibly survive this crash. I remember the loud sound of the collision, and then nothing at all after that. Everything went black, thanks to my concussion. I do remember rather vaguely hearing the sound of firemen extracting us from the vehicle, as they made such a noise. One guy was saying there is no way anybody could possibly be alive in this. I couldn't believe that I was actually breathing, but it was a struggle, let me tell you. I had so many injuries, you see. Let's just say my body was put through a liquidizer. I reached out to squeeze Sasha's hand, and was surprised she didn't retract it. She seemed to appreciate being comforted. It must have been so dreadful. You poor thing. I've heard that people's lives flash before them, moments before an impact in a fatal collision. I can't imagine what it must have been like for you, Sasha. It's not something you'd wish on your worst enemy, is it? Well, that didn't happen to me. I mean, my life flashing before me like you suggest. I guess I just didn't feel ready to die. I mean, I'm still young. I've got little Oliver to raise, who really needs me. And yet I had to let it all go, surrender to what was about to happen to me, even though I didn't want to. And then I drifted between consciousness and unconsciousness. I've had so many operations, but Nick's been through worse than I have. I'm just so glad and grateful he's alive. I never fully appreciated him until now. I realized I married an absolute treasure. You did indeed, Sasha. Let's not kid. Nick is a gem. I'm very happy the both of you are alive. It's perfectly understandable for you to be traumatized by the event. You were clearly not meant to die, so that's why you're still here, isn't it? Is that what you really believe, Suzy? Sasha asked me with widening eyes. Do you believe we die when we're meant to? I shrugged my shoulders nonchalantly. How did I answer a question like that, when I didn't even know the answer? Well, do you know what I think, Sasha? That there are no accidents in this world, not rarely. But then again, I don't believe that this is all there is. I believe none of us rarely die. I'm a distinct believer in reincarnation. It's the only thing that makes perfect sense to me. You might not agree with me on the matter. But otherwise, how do you explain the unfairness in this world? A kid, for example, dying at a mere 5 years old, while an old man dies at 101. Then there's the person living in abject poverty, and another living in the trappings of great abundance. I mean, if we reincarnate numerous times, we can experience a whole range of diversities. One life we may be poor like a church mouse, the next as rich as a king. It's even in the Bible, you know, reincarnation, although it's never mentioned in sermons. I think that the next life is more real than this one. Of that I'm most sure. That's what I've heard all the time, you know, in these near-death experiences that people talk about. Whether we're meant to die in a certain date is anybody's guess. Well, on a certain date. Some people believe these things are preordained, don't they? And maybe they are. But I'm no expert on any of these matters, and I don't pretend to be otherwise. I'm only telling you what I believe, which could be way off. Now, there is something I need to talk to you about, Sasha, I said, pulling the bracelet out of my purse to show her. Sasha's face tightened. There was fear written in her eyes as she focused on the silver bracelet in my hands. She gasped, "Oh, my God! Where did you get that from?" "Where did I get this from, Sasha? Where do you think I got it from? If you must know, little Oliver brought it into the house. It was in his toy collection, in the box that my husband brought into the house from the trunk of the black BMW, when you happened to drop Oliver off to stay at our house for a week. That silver bracelet fell out of his toy box. It was lying on the floor, and I happened to notice it at once. I asked Oliver why he'd taken your precious jewellery. I mean, he's a little boy who shouldn't be interested in girls' things. but he happened to be intrigued by the way the bracelet sparkled. It was like one of his favourite marbles, he told me. So he kept it and forgot to put it back where he found it. He told me you had clandestinely hidden the bracelet in a secret drawer in your bureau that he wasn't supposed to know about. Honestly, that boy, said Sasha, rolling her eyes. Well, what worries me, Sasha, is that this precious silver bracelet belongs to a murdered woman by the name of Mariette Margot Lane. Her death has been widely reported all over the local media. Her husband said an expensive silver bracelet she never removed from her wrist was missing from her corpse. He had given it to her for their wedding, with her full married name engraved on the back, and the words, "I love you forever." Well, it was all missing from her body. What I want to know, Sasha, is why do you, of all people, have a deceased woman's missing bracelet in your possession that you deliberately hid away in your bureau? What on earth is going on? Does my son know about this? Did you find the bracelet somewhere? Did my son give it to you? I need to know, Sasha, all the details. It's terribly important. Do you realize I am holding in my hands something the police would consider crime scene evidence and would be very interested in seeing? Stop all the questions, will you, Suzy? Said Sasha, waving me away, as if squatting a fly. Why do you have to be so nosy about everything? Poke your nose into everybody else's business. If you must know, Nick told me to get rid of the bracelet, but I didn't want to. He said it fell off Mariette's hand when he hit her with the brick in that alleyway, said Sasha. I couldn't throw the bracelet away. How could I do that? Mariette adored that bracelet. It was so special to her. You knew the dead woman? You never said. Of course I knew Mariette. She was my very best friend. But I didn't go advertising that when the news about her death was reported on every local radio station. But I was interviewed by the police because we were very close. We grew up in the same neighbourhood together. We were pretty much inseparable and were still close before she died. I miss her dreadfully. Do me a favour, Suzy. You need to get rid of that bracelet. I'm begging you, get rid of it. If the police find it, we'll get into so much trouble. You've got to get rid of it. Believe me, you have to. I don't know why I kept it. I must have lost leave of my senses. I cannot believe Oliver got hold of it. He's like a magpie. He's drawn to anything that sparkles. I tucked the bracelet cautiously back into my purse. Sasha, what is going on here? You haven't answered my questions. You've got to admit this does not look good for you. And as for myself, I should be responsible enough to be handing this over to the police. It's a criminal offence to tamper with evidence. I'm sure you know that. But you can't do that, said Sasha, looking horrified. Please, Suzy, the less you know about this, the better. Pretend you never ever saw the silver bracelet, and let's move on from here, shall we? But get rid of the thing, I'm begging you. I don't know if I can, Sasha. There's a dead woman involved here. There's a family grieving her loss. Justice needs to be served here. I can't turn a blind eye to this. Quit goading me, Suzy. All right, I will tell you everything. But it's strictly between you and I. And for God's sake, don't you dare go blabbing to the police. That is the worst possible thing you could do. If it makes you feel any better, Nick told me she didn't suffer. Her death was quick. He didn't mean for it to happen. It was a dreadful, dreadful accident. My body froze at the mention of Nick's name. Had my Nick killed Mariette Margot Lane? It couldn't be. The blood drained out of my body as I gawked at Sasha, my jaw dropping to the ground. I felt as if I'd been run over by a freight train. I must have misheard her, surely. There is no way my Nick would raise a hand to a woman, let alone kill her. I couldn't believe he'd killed her, Suzy. I really couldn't. I wanted to kill him myself for what he'd done. He was such a prize idiot. I had no idea he'd even got involved with my best friend at the party like that. It threw me to the curb, let me tell you. I was absolutely furious to find all this out, and it was very hard for me to forgive him for what he'd done. But I've got a big heart, Suzy. He was dreadfully afraid, poor Nick, of being put in prison and his reputation going up in smithereens. I'd warned him that Mariette was working up the courage to go to the police, because finally she confessed to me. She told me everything that had happened that night. She said that Nick had sexually assaulted her at that party. When Nick heard that, I tell you, he freaked out. I knew Mariette wasn't making any idle threats. She decided she was definitely going to the police, that it was the right thing to do, even though I persuaded her not to, but she refused to listen. Nick told me that at the party, she was the one that had come on to him, and not the other way round. She'd said no to him, but she insists she never said no. She claimed he forced himself on her. How am I supposed to take that, Suzy? I love Nick. He's been so good to me, you know. How can I betray him? By telling the police what he's done. I mean, he never ever meant to hurt Mariette. All he wanted to do was to talk to her, make her see reason. They really should have met in a public place, but they didn't. When he saw her venturing down the alleyway in town, he thought this was a quintessential opportunity to talk to her in private, without any prying eyes around. She'd been refusing to take his calls or to see him. Well, things escalated down that alleyway. They got out of hand. Mariette provoked him with all her threats. She told him that they hoped they flung him into jail and threw away the key, and that everybody would know the truth about him, that he was nothing but a perverse sexual predator. When I saw the bracelet in his possession on the desk in the hallway, my blood went cold, let me tell you. I knew that Mariette would never ever take that bracelet off that her husband had given her, but Nick confessed that it actually fell off her hand. So he picked it up and put it in his pocket and ran away with it. He was worried that when he grabbed her wrist, that the fingerprint might be on the bracelet. He admitted to me he had killed her in a moment of unbridled anger when he picked up a brick he found lying in the alleyway and just slammed it at her head. Mariette was doggedly stubborn, you see, Suzy. I know all too well what she's like. She told me that Nick was not going to get away with raping her at the party. But I don't believe for a second he actually raped her. Nick would never ever do that. I think she came on to him. Her husband knew nothing about this incident. But she's done this thing before, Suzy. So I don't trust her completely. She's blamed other men for raping her in the past, and they never touched her. So she does that kind of thing, you know. I told Mariette that it was just probably a misunderstanding, that Nick would never ever force himself on anyone. She said he knew exactly what he was doing. Nick had been inebriated that night. He admitted that to me. He didn't mean for things to go so far. I was shocked he killed her, but I believe him when he said that her fortuitous death was never premeditated. It just happened. You see, he followed her into town because he was so frustrated, because he needed to talk to her. And then he saw her taking a shortcut through that alleyway to get to the parking lot. He saw this as the perfect moment to just have a private chat with her. But she started screaming at him. And then, partly to shut her up, I suspect, he just picked up a brick and threw it at her head. The blood drained from my face. Nick did this? Oh, Sasha, it's just too dreadful. You're telling me Nick did this? I can't believe it. I told you, Suzy. Nick never meant for any of this to happen. I promise you that. He tried his level best to reason with Mariette. But you've got to understand, she can be rather weird. She told him she was going to the police the very next day to report him, and there was nothing he could do about it. Nick told me he was filled with anger and unbridled rage. Then she started screaming blue murder at him. They had a bit of a slanging match together in that alleyway, tearing each other apart they were, like a couple of manic dogs. She was accusing him of being a sexual predator. Can you imagine that? He was telling her she was a big fat juicy liar, and that everything that had transpired between the two of them had been at her leading. And now she was acting like a woman who'd been badly wronged, so that her husband wouldn't know she'd willingly been unfaithful. It all escalated, Suzy. It got badly out of control. And before he knew it, he'd lifted up a brick he found lying there in the alleyway and thrown it at her to shut her up. Then she went down like a lead balloon, And when he checked her pulse, he realized that she was dead and that he'd killed her. He was terrified. He hightailed it out of there as fast as he could and was violently sick in his black BMW. At that moment the nurse came in the ward, telling me my time was up. She was practically shooing me away. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Sasha needs her rest. You need to go now. But please, I do need to speak with Sasha a little longer. It's very, very important. I'm sorry, ma'am. You need to go. I've already given you far too much time. Sasha needs her rest. You can come back in the morning." As I reluctantly left the hospital, my heart was pounding a dime to a dozen. I felt as if my knees were going to give way beneath me and crumble. Sasha had told me that Nick had murdered Mariette Margot Lane. This couldn't be happening to me. He had seen her down an alleyway and tried to persuade her not to go to the police and report him for sexual assault. I didn't think my Nick was capable of behaving like this. He was not a womanizer. He never had been. My Nick had always believed in being chivalrous towards women. He had never been a player. How did Sasha feel about her own husband coming on to her very best friend? She hadn't even expressed her indignance about that. For some women, that would be the end of their marriage. But Sasha seemed to view the world through a very different lens. Only moments ago, Sasha had told me that Nick was an absolute treasure. But how could you describe a man like that if they'd actually killed your very best friend? Sasha was a very idiosyncratic woman. I'd certainly give her that. I recalled all too clearly how Nick's eyes had popped wide open when I'd mentioned the bracelet belonging to Mariette Margot Lane. He had looked directly at me with a frightened fear in his eyes, and his face had grown as white as a sheet, and he'd begged me, albeit somewhat inaudibly, to get rid of the bracelet. I didn't know what to think about this whole wretched matter. I couldn't believe that my Nick, my precious beloved son, would become so incandescent with rage that he'd throw a brick at a woman and inadvertently kill her to shut her up. I guess her screaming must have frightened him half to death. When I climbed very reluctantly into my car in the hospital car park, I sat there gormlessly in the driver's side seat, staring blankly into space for a very long time. My head was spinning around and around, as if I'd indulged in psychedelic drugs. My whole body trembled and wobbled like a jelly, and someone, obviously seeing me in a state, was knocking on the car window, asking me if I was all right. Ma'am, are you all right?" I told them I was absolutely fine. But fine, I certainly was not. I was feeling far from fine. This business was crazy. My Nick was not a murderer. None of this made any sense to me at all. My son was no monster. He'd always been such a lovely boy growing up, so thoughtful, kind, so generous. He'd only had a couple of serious girlfriends, whom he'd been devoutly loyal to. Based on what Sasha had told me, Nick had been quite taken by her best friend, and at a party, in an inebriated state, he had made amorous advances towards Mariette Margot Lane, who claimed my son had forced himself on her. Was that why Sasha was taking Nick's infidelity like a pinch of salt? Because he'd been 2 sheets to the wind and didn't even know what he was doing? What if my son really had forced himself on that woman? What if Mariette's claims were absolutely true? It didn't bear thinking about. I drove back home in a foggy haze, knowing I could not share any of this with my husband. I barely remember that journey back home, and the last thing I wanted to do was to spend any time with Oliver or my husband. I wanted to shut myself away, bury my head in the sand. How I wished I remained ignorant and naive about everything, and that I hadn't investigated this bracelet at all. I loved my son more than life itself. I'd happily have taken a bullet for him, and even though he'd murdered a woman, I didn't think I could ever betray my son's trust to the police, unless of course he imposed a threat to other women, which he certainly did not.
Grammy, did you see Mummy and Daddy?
Asked Oliver, when I finally got back into the house. Yes, I saw them, Sausage. They're doing very well. They're going to be just fine, as I told you. Now I can't play with you, little Oliver. Grammy's got a big headache. I need to lie down for a while." My husband looked rather worried about me. "Sweetness, are you all right? You look deathly pale. You're not getting sick, are you?" "I'll be fine once I've had a bit of a rest. I would appreciate it, love, if you could take care of Oliver for me. I need to lie down for a while until this headache passes." I remember going to my bedroom, and while my husband entertained little Oliver, I wept and wept until I could weep no more. My pillow was completely saturated by my tears. I woke up in the middle of the night with quite a start. My husband beside me was fast asleep. I could see the rise and fall of his chest. I glanced briefly at the bedside clock on the nightstand and was staggered to see it was 1 p.m. in the morning. Had I really been asleep for that long? I wiped the sleep away from my eyes and remembered the harrowing events of the previous day and how my son and his wife had begged me to get rid of the bracelet. I realized as a mother it was the only practical thing that I could do. I loved my Nick, and I would be damned if he'd be locked away in prison for what he'd done, especially since it had been a dreadful accident. Even though he deserved it, of course he did, because he'd killed a woman. I was my son's mother, and I would go to hell and back to protect him from a prison sentence. My grandson needed his father growing up, and I needed my son more than anything in the world. And if hiding evidence meant I was protecting him, I was willing to do it. I sat up in bed, wondering what I should do, how I should get rid of the bracelet. In a trice an idea popped up in my mind. I had the perfect place to bury the bracelet so that it would never ever be recovered. I would climb under the fence like I had done a few nights earlier, when I had found my grandson playing with a juvenile Bigfoot. I could only hope that my grandson Oliver was not up to his old mischievous tricks again, and clandestinely slipping out of his bedroom window in the middle of the night to meet up with his Bigfoot friend Suzy, which is exactly what he would love to do. But it would seem the threat I had launched at him of telling his mother Sasha about his incorrigible behaviour seemed to have nipped his nocturnal behaviour in the bud. Since then he'd promised me that he'd not been leaving his bedroom during the night, and I'd checked his window many times over, and it remained steadfastly locked, and his sneakers clean. I believed he was telling me the truth.
"Grammy, I promise you I haven't been going out. Susan did come to my window, and he was very sad he couldn't play with me any more. But his mummy says that I must respect your wishes, so he says he won't be bothering me again. I miss him, Grammy, so much."
"Well, you've got Spikes, love. You can play with him as long as you like, and he's a very lovable dinosaur, isn't he?" Oliver pulled a face.
"Spikes is not real, Grammy. He's a stupid, stupid fluffy toy. He's not a real dinosaur, not like the ones you see in the books. And he speaks with a stupid, stupid battery-operated voice. I don't like him any more."
"Oh, don't be like that, Oliver. He's a very, very nice dinosaur, and I can see he loves you very much."
"Fluffy toys don't have feelings, Grammy. You're the one that's being stupid, and it's all your fault that I can't play with Susan because you're horrible. You're just like my mummy. Really, really horrible."
"You don't mean that, Oliver, do you? I'm not really horrible. I'm just looking out for you. We'll find something else for you to do to keep you occupied. But you can't go slipping out of your window at night to play with Susan, because I've got a responsibility to take care of you." I removed the bracelet from my purse and studied it at length, and then I made a decision. I knew what I would do. I would climb under the fence into my neighbour's property and dig a hole under a tree in the wood grove, and I would bury the bracelet there. It seemed like the perfect solution to get rid of the incriminating evidence once and for all. The house was very quiet as I slipped very silently out of the kitchen door, wearing a pair of leggings and a sweater and a pair of sneakers on my feet. I took great care to be as quiet as I possibly could. Our old dog Molly had died a year prior, and although I missed her terribly, If she was around, my exit from the house would have been promptly noted, as Molly would have alerted the entire household with her incessant barking. For once I was glad she wasn't around. I put a flashlight on my head and carried a trowel with me that I had collected from the yard shed. My heart was pounding violently in my chest as I skulked around in the darkness like a furtive criminal. I knew what I was doing was intrinsically wrong, and pangs of a dreadful guilt shot through me like shooting stars in the night sky. But I had to do this. I didn't have a choice in the matter. I reminded myself of my loyalty to my son. I knew that there were few mothers in the world that would not move heaven and earth when it came to protecting their own progeny, even if what they were doing was wrong. There was a full moon in the sky that night, something I was extremely grateful for, so that the shadowy impressions of the trees were not as intimidating as they could have been. The Milky Way was spectacular as I stared up at the sky, trying to empty my head of what I was about to do. I slid the trowel under the fence and followed closely behind. I began to navigate my way cautiously down the long, spindly trail through the trees. I was thankful that the soil beneath my feet was not as wet and muddy as it had been, so I wasn't getting filthy dirt all over my sneakers. Autumn leaves bedecked the paths, and some fallen leaves floated along the path like celestial butterflies. The trees whooshed as their branches danced in the breeze. My cheeks were nudged by the soft kisses of this cool embrace. I'd never been one to enjoy navigating my way down a long, lonely path, witnessed only by the lofty trees, but I was so focused on the job at hand that I refused to allow my wavering doubts to distract me from my purpose. I'd been walking in the trees for about 10 minutes, my eyes shooting around the grove for a perfect spot to hide the bracelet. I soon found a very distinctive tree that I knew I would never forget in a hurry, which was important because it would be a good landmark. The tree was like a work of art, with its umbrella-like branches that looked like octopus tentacles that swept around the whole body of the tree. The trunk was full of hollow cavities where you could hide a multitude of lost treasures. For a moment I considered hiding the bracelet in one of those hollow cavities. I was certainly tempted to do so, but promptly decided against it. I began to work up quite the sweat as I huffed and puffed, plunging the sharp end of the trowel into the ground, and I began to dig. Thankfully the ground was soft, due to the recent torrential rains. The thudding sound of my trowel hitting the ground with rhythmic beats was rather noisy and obtrusive, but no one was around. Well, so I thought. That was when I heard it, a strange knocking sound, as if someone was beating a tree like a drum. My back straightened. It became as erect as a tree, my chest tightening, as if all the life-giving oxygen was being squeezed right out of me. What the hell was that? I looked around me nervously and was hit with the unnerving feeling that I was being watched and observed, that not only the trees had witnessed my crime, but somebody else had seen what I was getting up to. But in the uncertain, dingy light that blocked the moonlight from spilling through the trees to light up the path, I saw nothing, apart from the ambiguous tenebrific shadows the night naturally invites. "Hello! Hello, is anybody there?" I called out nervously. "Hello! Anybody there?" But I was met with no answer. All remained silent. The wind continued to whip through the trees. I could hear the occasional rustle of autumn leaves, the lone hoot of a faraway owl, the flutter of wings, the distant howl of a coyote. But beyond that, everything was still. Once I dug the hole, which was about 4 foot deep, I dropped the bracelet in the sole. "I'm sorry, Mariette," I said. "I had to do this. Don't take it personally. I just can't allow my son to go down for this murder. I'm really sorry that he did this to you. But I'm a mother, and I have to protect my son. He didn't mean for you to die. Please forgive me. Forgive him. Don't hold this against me, nor him. I'm really sorry for what happened to you." After I'd said my piece, I carefully dropped the bracelet into the soil. "I'm so sorry, Mariette," I said. "I've got to do this. Don't take it personally. But you would understand if you were a mother. I can't allow my son to go down for your murder. And I know he didn't mean to harm you. It was a dreadful, dreadful accident. I'm really sorry he did this to you. But I have to protect my son. Please forgive me, and don't hold this against me. I'm so sorry for what happened to you." After I'd said my piece, I filled the hole up with soil and carefully patted it down with my hands, sprinkling some autumn leaves over the spot so that the ground physically appeared undisturbed. I was reasonably satisfied that finally I'd buried the bracelet, and for a brief moment relief washed over me, like a warm, refreshing shower. I had got rid of it, but I would never be able to unburden myself with what my son had done. I would have to live with that heavy burden for the rest of my life. All of a sudden I was almost certain something was watching me. It was like I could feel eyes burning into the back of my skull. But once again, nothing was there. As I walked away from the scene, with a trowel trussed up in my hands, I was once again certain that not only was I being watched, but something was following me. And I wasn't wrong, because when I turned around to look over my shoulders, I saw her, and I think she wanted me to see her. It was a female Bigfoot. She was enormous. She was majestic. She was mighty and powerful. She stood there for a brief moment, staring at me through her yellow eyes, and then she just turned around and glided away. In that moment, I was certain I had seen Suzanne's mother. Had she observed me burying the bracelet into the earth, I wondered? I was almost certain she had. The following morning, after visiting my son, who was in a groggy state in hospital, I assured him I'd got rid of the bracelet. I then went to visit his wife, Sasha. "Oh, there you are," said the nurse, giving me a warm smile. "Sasha told me that if you visited her ward, she'd very much like to see you. Please follow me. Come this way." Sasha was sitting up, propped up against the pillows. "Did you get rid of the bracelet?" she asked me. "Yes, I did. But I don't feel good about any of this, Sasha. I know it's wrong to get rid of police evidence, but what else could I do?" "It may be wrong, but sometimes you've got to do what you've got to do," said Sasha. "I have to protect Nick, don't I? I mean, I owe him a lot. He raised me when I was a little girl, didn't he? He took good care of me. I wish to God he hadn't come to that party with us. I mean, why did he make such a beeline for Mariette? I mean, he knew she was my best friend growing up, and then he goes chasing after her. It was seriously sick. I mean, he's old enough to be her father, isn't he? But I guess when you're drunk, your inhibitions go down the drain pipe. But I still say that she did not say no to him." My blood went cold. "Love, what did you say?" Sasha frowned. "I told you not to call me love, Suzy. You know I find it patronising. I won't even let Nick call me pet names like that." "I'm very sorry, Sasha. You must forgive me. But what are you talking about? You told me my son Nick killed Mariette. You told me that yesterday very clearly. Now you're saying he didn't." "I didn't say your son killed Mariette, Suzy. You got me wrong. When I said Nick killed Mariette, I wasn't talking about your son, Nick. Are you crazy? Nick would never harm a fly. Surely you know that. Nick would be mortified if he thought his own mother thought he was capable of murdering another human being. I was talking about my uncle Nick, the one who became a father to me after my parents died in that fatal car accident. The Nick who killed Mariette is my uncle Nick. Don't you remember him? He's the one that got Nick a black BMW at a great price. He knows the man who runs the dealership. He owns a black BMW himself." "You mean my Nick never murdered Mariette? Is that what you're saying?" "Of course your Nick didn't murder Mariette. My God, Suzy, is that what you thought? I'm in shock that you'd ever think your son was capable of doing a thing like that. Even my Uncle Nick isn't really capable. It was just a dreadful accident. But never your son, Suzy. Never him." "Of course that's what I thought," I growled contemptuously. "But you told me specifically. You said that my Nick killed Mariette. I heard it with my own ears. The words came out of your mouth. The only Nick I rarely know in my life is my son. What was I supposed to think? I don't even know your uncle, for goodness sake. When I was speaking to you yesterday, you didn't even suggest that this was your uncle you were talking about to me. Yes, but you know my uncle's name is Nick. Surely you know that. How many times have I told you? Of course I know your uncle's name is Nick. But I didn't know you were talking about him, did I? I wish to God, Sasha, you'd be more pacific. Sasha shrugged her shoulders nonchalantly. It's hardly my fault, Suzy, is it, that you got your wires all crossed? I can't believe you could even believe that Nick would be capable of killing someone. That's insane. But your uncle killed Mariette, didn't he, Sasha? Even if he didn't mean for it to happen, even if it was a dreadful accident, why would you protect him like this? Mariette was your very best friend. You need to go to the police. Tell them what you know. That your uncle made a mistake. But you don't understand, Suzy. I love my uncle. I also love Mariette. I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place, aren't I? My uncle was behaving like a lecherous old fool that night. He should never have made a play for a younger woman like that. It was disgusting. But he was so inebriated. He wasn't thinking straight. You know what alcohol is like, what it can do to a person. When Mariette told me what my uncle had done to her, I was devastated, of course I was, but I also didn't believe her entirely. Well, not 100%, because Mariette can exaggerate. And she's done this sort of thing before, you know. She also told me she was going to the police to report him for rape. I begged her not to do it, that it would ruin my uncle's reputation. But she doggedly refused to listen. And well, you know the rest, so I will spare you all the details. But no one is more remorseful over what happened than my Uncle Nick. So you think because he's remorseful for killing your best friend, he should get away with her death? That's not how it works, Sasha. Your uncle did a very bad thing, even if it was an accident. Sasha sighed. You don't understand, Suzy, what I'm saying. I was telling you yesterday that not everything is black and white, and I really meant that. I could have been taken into foster care, you know, as a child. But my uncle took great care of me. I owe Uncle Nick big time for his kindness to me. He was such a loving father to me. He sent me to the best schools money could buy, gave me a high standard of living. I never wanted for anything, Suzy, growing up. My uncle could have married, but you know he never did. And do you know why? He wanted to raise me on his own. He was worried that a stepmother might not care for me in the right way. You hear stories, don't you, of wicked stepmothers? He didn't want any of that for me. He sacrificed so much for me, you know, Suzy. When he first adopted me, he was as poor as a church mouse, making leather sandals for a living, and that's the way he wanted it to be. But when I was put in his charge, he chose to make something of himself. He became a wealthy architect, for no other reason, I might add, than because I was in his care. So underneath all the layers, he's a good man. But when he drinks, he gets rather frisky. Well, I've done bad things in my life, I admitted. Things I've regretted, hurt people unintentionally, driven through a red light. But you know what? I have never killed someone. Your uncle may have been inebriated when he preyed on Mariette, but he was stone-cold sober when he flung that brick at her in the alleyway. You need to report him to the police, love. What I don't understand is why my son wants to keep this all cloak and dagger like you do. Because your son happens to be loyal to me, that's why. You could take some pointers from him, Suzy. Nick knows that if Uncle Nick is locked behind bars, that it'll break my heart. I've lost one person I love, in losing my very best friend Mariette. I don't want to lose the two people I care about. Even though your uncle killed Mariette, that's the way you feel, is it, dear? Yes, even though he killed her. You don't get it, Suzy. I love my Uncle Nick. You love your son, Nick. You were quite happy to hide the bracelet, weren't you, when you thought it was your son who'd killed Mariette? Isn't that a bit of a double standard? The pot calling the kettle black? Well, I feel the same way about my Uncle Nick. It's natural I want to protect him. Don't get me wrong, Suzy. What he did to Mariette was unforgivable. You don't kill someone to shut them up, do you? But he didn't really kill her for that reason. She made him as mad as hell. I wish to God I could go back in time and change the script, but I just can't. And I can't sit back and do nothing, Sasha. As much as you love your Uncle Nick, I'm going to go to the police myself with that bracelet and tell them exactly what happened. There's a family out there that needs closure. They're grieving the loss of their daughter. And you really think them knowing all the insidious details about what happened to their daughter is going to make them any happier? Mariette is dead. She's never coming back, Suzy. The family've been able to bury her body. You can't right a wrong, can you? None of us can. Do you really think that knowing that my uncle forced himself on her, well, that's what they're going to believe, is going to make them feel any better about what happened? And what about her husband? He's going to either think that Mariette committed infidelity, or he's going to think that she was raped, one or the other. Do you think he wants to know that? I mean, it'll be 1,000 times worse for all of them, knowing the truth. I'm going to think about this long and hard, Sasha, before I decide what I'm going to do. When I returned home from my visit to the hospital, I was filled with an overwhelming sense of relief that my son Nick was not the person responsible for killing Mariette Margot Lane. But it didn't make me feel comforted that the man who'd killed her was getting away with Mariette's death, even if it was not premeditated. Yet at the same time I could understand Sasha's extreme loyalty to her uncle. By the sounds of things, he had busted a gut to give her the perfect life, which was maybe why she came across sometimes as rather spoilt, self-entitled and aloof. I knew one thing. I needed to go back to the woods to retrieve that bracelet, whatever decision I would make. I was not sure whether I would go to the police or not, with my evidence. I'd need to think over the matter long and hard. I really was stuck between the devil and the deep blue sea. I felt apprehensive about going to the police, due to a perverse sense of loyalty I had towards Sasha, my daughter-in-law, even though since she'd married my son Nick, we'd never been close. I hardly wanted to sour the relationship with Nick still further by upsetting his wife, as many a young man, when asked to choose between their mother or their wife, will often side with their wife. If Sasha became significantly upset, it would distress Nick considerably. He had certainly begged me to get rid of the bracelet, as he wanted to protect his wife by keeping her secret. When I arrived back home, I was relieved to find a note on the fridge from my husband, saying that he was taking little Oliver pony riding. Thank God he wasn't at home, I thought. I knew there was no time like the present but to go into the woods to retrieve that bracelet. So armed with the trowel, I climbed under the fence and made my way back into the woods, even though I knew I was trespassing on private property. What a contrast it was going into the woods on such a spectacular, very fine autumn day, where the tall, lofty, resplendent trees, dressed in all their magnolious finery, were ablaze in rich colours of gold, red and amber. A pretty sunshine trickled through the open gaps in the canopy above my head, and the woodland earthy smells of dirt, pine needles and floral notes filled the air, while birds nestling high in the trees sang their tuneful choruses. I made my way towards the distinctive tree, with the folding umbrella-like branches, and when I reached it, I stared in stunned silence at the sight that met my eyes. The ground had been visibly disturbed where I'd buried the bracelet. It had all been dug up. There were mounds of earth everywhere, and a great big hole in the ground, and I knew, without even looking, that the bracelet was gone. I knew at once who was responsible for the disappearing bracelet. It had to be Susan's mother, the female Bigfoot. She had probably been watching me all along, as I dug a shallow grave for it. For a moment I felt a tangible sense of relief wash over me. Certainly without the bracelet in my possession, I didn't have the evidence to go to the police, so in effect there was nothing I could do to point a finger at my daughter-in-law's uncle for the death of Mariette Margot Lane. I was about to turn around on my tracks when I heard a rustle, the snap of twigs, and the padding of feet moving towards me. And that was when some hand pulled back the shrubbery between the trees, like a curtain in a shower cubicle. And I drew in a deep breath, because I knew what was coming. And sure enough, standing yards away from me, was Susan's mother, the female Bigfoot. And in the revealing light of the day, she was not just an ambiguous dark shadow that I could pretend didn't exist, but was as real as you and me. And in real life, she was absolutely majestic. I was not remotely afraid of her, although I should have been, because she was absolutely gargantuan in size. But I knew the juvenile Bigfoot Susan had befriended my grandson Oliver, and Susan's mother had watched over the both of them while they played together. I could feel her energy was both benevolent and incredibly kind. She stood there staring at me through treacle-coloured eyes, and for a long moment our eyes locked together in companionship, as if we'd known each other for a long time. I guess I just gawked at her quite rudely, as I had to take every part of her in, from the soles of her feet to the top of her pyramid-shaped head. I knew that this unlikely, fortuitous meeting of souls may not happen again. I wanted to remember every moment of this idiosyncratic encounter, as at night my impression of her had been so much more vague and ambiguous. I heard the words in my head. "I knew you would come back for it. Why would you bury such a pretty thing?" I watched her glide over to the tree, and on one of the hanging branches was the bracelet, sparkling in the morning light. The Bigfoot picked up the bracelet and handed it over to me. I think she was doing some kind of psychometry, because she said before she handed the bracelet to me, "The lady connected to this is at peace. I want you to know that. She wants you to know that. Do not worry about her. She was meant to leave when she did. It was her time to go. She also wants you to know that." Even though the Bigfoot did not speak to me audibly, those were the words that entered my head. She was communicating with me in a way Susan communicated with my grandson. She looked at me sadly. "Susan misses the boy, but I understand his need to sleep." And with that she nodded at me and glided away, and I watched her float into the forest until she was gone. To cut a long story short, I was glad I never had to go to the police to present my evidence to the authorities, as Nick himself stepped forward to admit to having killed Mariette Margot Lane. His guilt had weighed heavily on his shoulders, so he did end up serving a prison sentence, but tragically died in prison of a heart attack. I'm glad to say that my daughter-in-law Sasha returned the bracelet to Mariette's husband, who was grateful to have the bracelet back in his possession. My relationship with Sasha these days is a work in progress, but it has improved exponentially. Oliver received a gift from Susan the night before he returned home. Susan wished him the very best and gave him a beautiful stone for him to keep. It may look like an ordinary stone to most people, but my grandson treasures it greatly. I never did see Susan and his mother again, but I know they're still out there, watching over the woods, and who knows, one day we might cross paths again, but hopefully in a lot better circumstances. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.